Chapter 1358. Planet Mocha, the home planet of the Dalent, was a world that was heavily protected by countless powerful magic. To be exact, one could not even observe its existence in the universe, let alone use any ultra-long-distance teleportation magic or aircraft to approach it directly. That was because any teleporter or aircraft that did not have permission would be directly connected to the surface of the star that was emitting scorching energy. The temperature of more than 8,000 degrees Celsius would directly burn the unwelcome intruder to the point that not even ashes would be left. Hence, the first hurdle to enter Planet Mocha was to obtain a teleportation permit, or at least a temporary one. One had to know that this wasn't an easy task. In order to ensure the absolute safety of the home planet, even the Dalent had to abide by strict rules. Even the supreme commander of the expeditionary army had to patiently wait for the council's reply. Clearly, the boy's actions had probably made him on the blacklist of the council's higher-up. Hence, when his application was sent back, the other side gave a definite answer in less than a day. After all, the other party had done so much and even ordered the shadow guards to bring back the two precious test subjects unscathed. As for whether they would be brought back for deeper and more complex research or kept as breeding machines to pass down their precious bloodlines and integrate them into the Dalent's higher-ups, that was a question to be discussed in the future. Unfortunately, the higher-ups had no idea that the shadow guards they sent had failed, and the ambitious boy had begun to shift his attention to the birthplace of the Dalent, the Dark Lake. In the evening, when the blue star in the sky was about to set, two old Dalent elders were sitting in the balcony garden on the top floor of the Supreme Council, admiring the colorful magical radiance of the city below while discussing countermeasures. The old man in a purple robe with abnormal yellow pupils spoke first. "Old friend, how did you deal with the boy's requests to return to the home planet?" "I don't know. Maybe he was afraid, or maybe he had some other thoughts, but no matter what, he chose to come back on his own initiative instead of being caught by the shadow guards. Based on this alone, we can't treat him like a prisoner. Whatever the case may be, he has successfully pacified a world brimming with resources and solved the problem of World 02 along the way." The old man in green robes expressed his opinion meaningfully. However, from his casual attitude, it was not difficult to determine that this was definitely a perfunctory attitude and not the true thoughts in his heart. "You mean?" The old man in the purple robe seemed to have realized something. He pursed his lips and revealed a playful expression. "What I mean is, give him what he deserves. Regardless of whether it was a resounding name or a proper social status. But there's one thing, he can't leave the mother planet under our feet, and he can't leave the surveillance of the Senate." The green-robed old man directly showed his trump card. That was because they had connected to World 93 a few days ago. At the same time, they were aware of what insane, cruel, bloodthirsty, and callous actions the seemingly harmless boy had committed after leaving the Council's surveillance. Even the Dalent, who had conquered and destroyed countless worlds, couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines when they saw the miserable state of the native. It was especially so for the survivors who were kept in captivity like livestock. They had no future to speak of, and yet these pitiful creatures still worshipped the culprit as if they were gods. Then what about his arrangements? You should know that he has shown a strong desire for control, as well as a meticulous and mature way of thinking. Even if he stays on the mother planet, he probably won't behave too well. Perhaps we should delay for a while and let him taste the taste of failure. That's the right choice. The purple-robed old man raised a different opinion. "Ha ha ha ha. Don't be so harsh, my dear friend. You have to understand that he's still a child. A little rebellion is completely tolerable. Don't forget about the dark blue liquid that's being researched. Once it succeeds, it'll be an immeasurable amount of wealth for the entire civilization. As for the shadow guards, their methods are too violent, and their hearts are filled with resentment towards us. Did you know? Since 300 years ago, the Shadow Guards have been complaining that they've given too much and received too little. This is a signal, a very dangerous signal." When he said these words, the green-robed old man's pupils showed a strong sense of vigilance. As one of the people in power, he was very clear that the Shadow Guards were no longer a noble group that was willing to sacrifice everything for the entire race when it was first established. As time passed, these guys were rapidly corrupted. Some were even obsessed with a luxurious life and began to desire more power. It should be known that this corruption didn't refer to the power aspect, but to the spirit aspect. Therefore, the Shadow Guards who possessed the same terrifying power were 100 times more dangerous than their predecessors. If something really went wrong, the tragic battle with the gods that year would happen again. And this time, the price they had to pay was likely to be much heavier than that year. "Don't be nervous. I'll send someone to deal with the Shadow Guards. No matter what, they're our compatriots, so they shouldn't do anything out of line. As for power, if they want it, just give them a little bit. As long as we still have that thing, they won't dare to act rashly. The art of politics is to compromise and balance. Times have changed. You can't use the standards of the past to ask modern people." The purple-robed old man smiled and spread out his hands. "I hope so. Oh, I almost forgot to ask. I heard that your great-granddaughter has already begun to undergo transformation. She plans to integrate the boy's bloodline into her family. Is this true?" The green-robed old man stared into the other's eyes, his tone full of ridicule. The purple-robed old man replied indifferently, "Why not? You should know that he's the only suspected higher life form we've found so far. I believe you should know best what a higher life form means." "Of course I know. But don't forget, the reason why higher life forms are higher life forms is because they have an unparalleled advantage over lower life forms. Especially in the aspect of genetics, it's almost overwhelming. If this really happens, do you think that after the final fusion, the Dalant people will still be the Dalant people? Maybe after thousands or even tens of thousands of years, we'll have become another race. If this really happens, not only will I not feel worried, I'll feel gratified and happy." Chapter 1359. Time flew by, and a few months passed in the blink of an eye. During this period of boredom, the boy commanded the expeditionary army under him to carry out an inhumane purge of the last resistance forces on this barren planet. Under the crushing pressure of absolute power, the gods and followers who were struggling at death's door either had their living space squeezed bit by bit and eventually disappeared into an inconspicuous corner or were forced into a long hibernation. Whether they could come back in the future depended on luck. However, as the application to return to the mother planet was approved by the Supreme Council, the boy finally stopped what he was doing and began to secretly make the final preparations. He knew very well that he only had one chance to pass through the portal and reach his destination. If he failed, he would have to face the retaliation and ambitions of the entire Dalant civilization. No race or civilization would forgive someone who could dig up the dark history and dark side that they tried to hide. Besides, these secrets also threatened the survival of the Dalant civilization. "How is it? Are you ready?" Standing in front of the interplanar portal that had already begun charging, the boy did not look nervous at all. Instead, he was full of excitement and anticipation. Luke smiled helplessly. "If I say no, will you change your crazy plan?" The boy shook his head without hesitation. "No, of course not. You have to understand that I'm the one in charge now, and the only thing you can do is to cooperate with me to complete the entire plan. Since the answer is no, isn't it unnecessary for you to ask this question?" Luke asked with a chuckle, seemingly having expected this. "Ha ha ha ha. I like your sense of humor. Unfortunately, what I need now is not your sense of humor, but your power." As he spoke, the boy looked at the other end of the portal. In just a few seconds, the originally chaotic whirlpool had completely disappeared, and in its place was a huge circular rooftop. Without a doubt, the Supreme Council's authorization had been issued, and as long as it was passed through, they would be able to reach the mother planet that was heavily protected by countless powerful magic spells. Seeing this scene, Luke quickly put away his cynical look and responded with a serious expression, "Don't worry, I'll do my job well. However, the problem is that you have to understand that plans are never as big as changes. Accidents are inevitable. Alright, let's go. Don't let those old fogies wait for too long." The boy smiled meaningfully and was the first to step through the portal. As for Luke, he pulled his hood tight and hid within the expeditionary army, following closely behind. In less than 10 seconds, they had crossed a great distance and appeared in the sky above a city filled with dense magical energy. Before everyone recovered from the dizziness, an old man in a purple robe took the initiative to take 2 steps forward. He opened his arms and gave the boy a warm hug. "Welcome. Welcome back safe and sound with victory and glory, my child." "You flatter me. It's my pleasure." The boy bowed humbly. "You flatter me? No, no, no. I'm not flattering you. I'm just stating the facts." The old man shook his head with a smile. "Come, follow me. Your mentor and the other counselors have been waiting for a long time. You should know that today is not only a celebration of your victory and glory, but also a very important naming ceremony for the Dalent." Hearing these words, everyone present seemed to become somewhat agitated, especially the high-ranking officers of the Expeditionary Army who had just returned. Without exception, they were all ecstatic. After all, they were still worried whether they would be punished or suppressed when they returned to the mother planet. But now, since the Council had publicly acknowledged the achievements of the Supreme Commander, they naturally would not punish the people below him. Naming ceremony? So, I can finally have a name that belongs to me. The boy pretended to be surprised and asked. In fact, when he was very young, he already knew that a name was just a title, a code, and a label used to distinguish people. That was all. That's right. And after the naming ceremony, there are many surprises waiting for you. So, enjoy it. After saying this, the old man raised his withered and slender arm and snapped his fingers lightly. In an instant, the entire huge circular platform flew up and swept across the sky above the city at an extremely fast speed. Just as they were about to reach their destination, the boy's face suddenly revealed a strange smile. Immediately after, he took out a completely opaque black dagger from his wide sleeves and ruthlessly stabbed it into his back at a speed that was almost indiscernible to the naked eye. Poof! Accompanied by the huge force and inertia, the old man's body moved forward uncontrollably by 2 steps. Then, he fell to the ground with a plop and breathed his last. From the beginning to the end, it took less than a second for a powerful Dalent spellcaster to die just like that. What was even more frightening was that following his sudden death, the magical energy condensed in his body began to go berserk. In the blink of an eye, the dangerous energy storm wantonly destroyed everything on the platform, whether it was the exquisite buildings and statues, or the people standing on the platform. Damn it! What the hell is going on? Dead. Dead. The Honorable Counselor has been murdered. Catch the assassin. Idiot. Run. It's too dangerous here. Just as everyone was panicking, Luke, who had been hiding in the crowd, finally took off his hood and revealed his true appearance. He sneered and mocked, "Sorry, none of you can escape." As soon as he finished speaking, he threw out the things he had prepared earlier. The next second after these inconspicuous little things came into contact with the ground, extremely thick and strong vines immediately grew, and then tightly wrapped around those unlucky fellows who were busy trying to avoid the berserk energy. And those who were wrapped around by these vines, without exception, found that the energy in their bodies began to flow out wildly without control. At the same time, the vines became thicker and more intelligent, and even knew how to avoid the areas where the energy was the most destructive. In the end, as expected, not a single person on the platform was able to escape. Everyone became fertilizer for the vines. By the time the last person who tried to struggle was killed, the huge circular platform had become a dense tropical jungle. Chapter 1360. It's perfect. I didn't expect you to have completely grasped the Dalent's research on nature magic in such a short time. You've even added in a little of your own. The boy raised his hand and gently stroked a man-eating flower full of sharp teeth as he commented with a smile. One had to know that on this huge circular platform there were at least 1,000 mutilated corpses, many of which were his subordinates who had worked for him. However, there was no sadness, pity, or grief on his face at all. It was as if the corpses were just a bunch of insignificant ants. Similarly, Luke's reaction to the bloody scene before him was very calm. He replied nonchalantly, "If I were you, I wouldn't be thinking about these meaningless things right now. After all, the highest authority of the Dalent is right in front of you. You can't be thinking of giving them a big surprise, right?" "Why not?" The boy cracked open his mouth and revealed a cruel and bloodthirsty smile. "You have to understand that their mother planet hasn't been attacked for thousands of years. They've long forgotten how to react once they're attacked. Therefore, to us, this is an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We just need to give it a little push, and we can reawaken the fear and panic in the deepest part of their subconscious." A thoughtful expression appeared on Luke's face. "So, in your eyes, the Dalent civilization is a bit like a nut. It's extremely hard on the outside, but inside the hard shell, there's an incomparably delicious pulp." "That's right. Moreover, once their mother planet is attacked, guess what they'll do?" The boy held his chin and asked with a faint smile. "Of course, they'll chase after you and me like crazy, and ensure that there won't be a second attack." Luke spoke his thoughts without hesitation. For any mature civilization, maintaining the stability of society was the most important thing. Once the people started to panic, the original order would no longer exist. Following that, internal conflicts would rapidly intensify, and turmoil and chaos would arrive as expected. "Smart." The boy nodded approvingly. "Therefore, no matter what, they have to withdraw their forces and protect the most important cities. We can take the opportunity to head to the Dark Lake and figure out the secrets hidden behind history. Apart from that, with the strategic contraction, the Dalent's control over the conquered worlds will also weaken. You and I can take the opportunity to incorporate some of the natives and cut off their resource supply bit by bit. Look at this flourishing magic city. How long do you think it can last without the supply of external resources?" "Understood. Then let's do it." There was no hesitation. Luke directly poured a large amount of life force into the disk that was completely occupied by magical plants. Instantly, the plants, which were already lush to begin with, welcomed another round of crazy growth. When their size reached a critical point, the boys to use the disk as a weapon and hurled it at the building that symbolized the highest authority of the Dalent civilization. Boom! What followed was a loud sound. The magical protective shield of the building destroyed the disk, and thus of the Dalent SSTTT. However, the magical plants that fell along with the soil managed to escape the calamity. They directly took root and began to devour everything around them, especially the Dalent warriors who were standing at the door as guards of honor. Many of them did not even have time to react before they became the first victims. When Luke first designed the city, he had referred to the information obtained from his brothers and could make targeted modifications to all the plants. Therefore, although they were inferior in terms of lethality and continuous growth, they could devour energy to the greatest extent and then split and grow. In other words, all the plants were created according to the highly developed magical system in the Dalent city. The city under his feet was simply the perfect hunting ground for the magical plant. Not enough. Still not enough. I have to add more fuel to the fire. Looking at the large number of plants that were spreading at a speed visible to the naked eye, the boy seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied. He raised his hand and loudly chanted an incantation. Under his guidance, the abundant energy in the city quickly gathered and formed a huge black vortex. Just as this terrifying spell was about to be completed, a dark purple radiance suddenly spewed out from within the building, squeezing everything, including the plants and the roof, into dust that could not be seen with the naked eye. In less than half a minute, a few old fellows who were emitting astonishing auras finally appeared. One of them, who was wearing a green robe, roared furiously, "Do you know what you're doing? Greetings, esteemed chairman. You're finally willing to show yourself. Please allow me to introduce you. This is the person you've been looking for, my brother." The boy acted as if nothing had happened, his tone and attitude still full of respect. However, what he respected was not the other party's identity, but the power that the other party held. "Brother?" When the old man saw Luke's identical appearance, his pupils suddenly contracted. It was not only him. The few old fellows behind him had similar reactions. In particular, the dark blue crystal hanging around Luke's neck instantly attracted countless vigilant, fanatical, and greedy gazes. The boy's senses were very sharp. He immediately noticed this and asked in an uncertain tone, "What is it?" "Don't ask me. I'm not too sure either. However, I can confirm that it appeared with me." "Why you didn't?" A strange expression appeared on Luke's face. "I understand now. It's you guys. You guys stole what originally belonged to me and then secretly hid it." The boy quickly turned his gaze to the teacher who had raised him since he was young. Under the gaze of that pair of chilling eyes, the latter took a deep breath and said expressionlessly, "You guessed right. We were the ones who hid it." After receiving an affirmative answer, the boy opened his mouth and laughed wildly without restraint. "Ha ha ha ha. As expected. I knew you guys were up to no good. But it doesn't matter. What belongs to me will eventually return to my hands. Now I'll first collect a little bit of interest." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly activated the energy cluster in the center of the black vortex in front of the enemy. "No. Stop him. Sorry. It's already too late." Chapter 1361. Boom. Along with a loud bang, the energy vortex was rapidly transformed into a powerful shockwave that spread rapidly in all directions with the council's ruined buildings as the center. Wherever the shockwave passed, no matter if it was a building or a living being, all of them were deformed by the immense external pressure without exception. In the blink of an eye, the bustling center of the magic city disappeared, and was replaced by a huge crater with a radius of several kilometers and a depth of hundreds of meters. Shock, fear, panic. After a few seconds, the residents who lived in the outskirts of the city finally regained their senses and began to flee in all directions. Some even took advantage of the chaos to loot their wealth and kill their former enemies and competitors. The cruel reality proved that the order and civilization that the Dalent people had painstakingly built over thousands of years was not much stronger than the enemies that they had conquered and destroyed. On the contrary, they were very similar in nature, and there was not much difference. "Damn it, you! What have you done?" Looking at the city center that looked as if it had been hit by a meteorite, the council president's eyes were filled with rage. He couldn't believe that the boy, who was once thought to be well-behaved and not dangerous or aggressive, would become so crazy after leaving his sight for a short while. "What am I doing?" What a naive and ridiculous question. Have you forgotten about the races that were conquered and destroyed by the expeditionary forces? When they ask similar questions, how do you answer them? The boy asked with a scornful grin. "We're different from them. We're—" Before the council president could finish his words, the boy interrupted without hesitation. "No. You're not different from them at all. At least in my eyes, there's no difference at all. It's just that you're luckier than them and were the first to develop more advanced knowledge, technology, and strength. That's why you're robbing them instead of them robbing you. You want to destroy our civilization?" The council president was no fool. He immediately sensed the strong hostility in the boy's words and exuded a dangerous aura all over his body. Ha 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 ha. That's right. I want to destroy you. Enjoy your last wonderful moments. The next time I appear, the Dalent people will welcome the final judgment. After saying that, the boy opened a portal without hesitation and went in. Luke, on the other hand, smiled and bowed to the spellcasters who were far more powerful than him, before disappearing without a trace. After the two of them had completely disappeared, one of the counselors took a deep breath and said in an extremely heavy tone, "We were careless." "You're right. We were too careless. To be exact, they underestimated the growth speed and huge potential of a higher life form." Another council member also helplessly agreed. It could be seen that they were looking for an opportunity to make a sneaky move, intending to take down the two boys at the same time. Unfortunately, the strength displayed by the two boys had far exceeded their expectations. As a result, they dared not take the risk of causing more damage and start a fierce battle of life and death. After all, it had been thousands of years since the last fierce battle on the mother planet. Most people had long forgotten what war was like. Looking at the devastated city center, the speaker could not help but clench his fist. He gritted his teeth and ordered, "Go! Immediately release the information and inform the mother planet to officially enter the highest alert state." "What? Are you crazy? Since the establishment of the Parliament, there have only been 3 times that the mother planet has entered a state of alert, and this is the first time the highest alert has been issued. What's more, although the two boys have a certain level of strength, they are far from being able to threaten the entire mother planet." The council member who spoke first strongly objected. "No, I'm not crazy. It's just that you don't realize the seriousness of the problem. Don't forget, the two of them are higher life forms than us. If you still don't understand, you might as well think about the dark blue solution stored in the mysterious crystal. It doesn't need much, just a few drops would be enough to make us fall into eternal damnation. So stop talking nonsense and do as I say immediately. Also, get the Shadow Guards to look for me. Tell them that our civilization has encountered a huge threat." The speaker did not argue with anyone at all, nor did he have any intention of bargaining. He straightforwardly used the power in his hands to give the order. Because he understood that the biggest danger of the two boys was not how much damage they could cause, but that they were on the mother planet that was heavily protected by magic. They were like a sharp sword with a cold light that could fall at any time. Only by issuing the highest alert, retracting the power that had spread out, and protecting the densely populated important cities could they ensure that the people would not fall into a widespread panic and eventually lead to the collapse of order. To put it simply, these actions were not for the two boys to see, but for the people who did not know, so that they would still believe that the Parliament had the ability to maintain and protect the safety of the mother planet. As for the disastrous ruins under their feet, it was just an accident, and a similar situation would not happen again. "Understood. I'll do it right away." The council member seemed to have thought of something and nodded with a serious face. The rest of the council members joined the guards that rushed over from all directions and began to clean up the annoying magic plants. After more than 10 hours of hard work, these targeted and strengthened vines were finally uprooted, sealed and transported to a specialized institution for research. At the same time, the speaker also secretly received all the members of the Shadow Guards in the only parliament that was still intact in the ruins. "What happened?" The leader of the Shadow Guards frowned and asked in a low voice. "We're in trouble. A big trouble." The speaker did not have the slightest intention of hiding anything and confidently told the whole story. When he finished describing everything and began to pick up the cup to drink water, the leader of the Shadow Guards sneered and said sarcastically, "Trying to control a higher level of life and seize power that you can't control? I really don't know what's in your heads. Have you forgotten the fatal mistake that our ancestors made in the distant past? You're wrong. It's because we understand that we're trying to find a way to remove the near-eternal curse in the bloodline. I believe you should know best that when that power begins to flow in the blood vessels, it erodes the mind and consciousness. The Parliament needs your help, the entire civilization needs your help. Chapter 1362. This is the Dark Lake? Luke was shocked as he stared at the dark, ink-like liquid in front of him. The reason was simple. The liquid was not water, but a mixture of energy and matter. Due to its heavy mass, it could not be mixed into the air, which was why it was such a spectacular sight. Just like the Dalent's history had mentioned, this was a place where even the light from the stars could not dispel the darkness. Even the plants on both sides of the lake were distorted by the corrosion of energy over time, turning into a completely different life form. What was more interesting was that this was not a forbidden place for life like most people thought. On the contrary, every once in a while, there would be some life forms with different appearances that would walk out of the ink-like lake. However, their intelligence was not high and they were still controlled by their primitive desires. The first thing they did after leaving the lake was to kill each other like crazy. The winner would devour the loser, and the cycle would repeat. The most interesting thing was that there was no such thing as a victor in this endless battle. No matter how many of their kind a life form devoured, no matter how strong they became, they could not escape the fate of death. In other words, this killing was not for a life form to evolve, but to prevent any life form from leaving this place alive. It was a never-ending cycle. It was the boy's first time coming to this place. His eyes shone with curiosity as he replied softly, "That's right. This is the Dark Lake. To be exact, this is the outermost area of the Dark Lake. We need to pass through here to reach the place where the Dalent were first born. How is it? Can you feel the shocking souls hidden under the Black Lake?" "I can feel it. They are so huge and shocking. I can't believe how these pure soul fragments have been preserved until now," Luke said as he carefully avoided the mindless monsters. He used the wooden stick in his hand to push aside the lake water and took out a palm-sized soul. "I think the lake water is blocking the normal dissipation of the souls. Look, it's like a sealing layer that prevents positive energy from approaching this area." The boy calmly expressed his deduction. "But what is this lake water? Shadow energy and matter? Or is it some kind of power that we don't know about?" Luke asked with a frown. He did not know why, but when he touched the soul fragment, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity, as if this soul fragment was a part of him. Maybe, maybe not, who knows? The boy shrugged helplessly. Although he grew up under the elite education of the Dalent, they had long hidden this part of history and knowledge. Therefore, from a certain perspective, the two of them were on the same starting line. "All right, then how do you plan to pass through this dangerous area and reach the place where the Dalent were born?" The boy pointed at the bloody battle ahead. There was no road here, or anything that could be called normal. This was especially true for the only path near the shore. It was a cycle of life and death almost every moment. The boy rubbed his chin and hesitated for a moment. Soon, he said in a half-joking tone, "Maybe we can discuss with them. You have to understand that communication is the best strategy at any time and any place." "Communication? Is there something wrong with my ears, or is there something wrong with your brain? I don't think they can understand what you're talking about." Luke raised his eyebrows and teased. No, communication doesn't necessarily have to use words. Sometimes, actions are also a means of communication. For example, like this." Just as he finished speaking, the boy took out an energy ball with a golden glow from his pocket and gently threw it at the place where the battle was the most intense. This thing was left behind from the last time he collected stellar energy. It contained an unimaginable amount of positive energy and was the nemesis of these unknown black substances. There were no surprises. When the light ball reached the designated location, it instantly released a blinding light. The next second the entire world turned into the purest white. There was no explosion. There was no tremor. There were no screams or wails. By the time he recovered from the stinging pain in his eyes, the battlefield had completely disappeared. Even the black lake water had evaporated, leaving behind only tens of thousands of soul fragments. "Oh my God! This is spectacular!" Luke exclaimed as he licked his lips. The area of several square kilometers was filled with countless silver fragments of various sizes. Each of them was the purest and most flawless soul. No memories. No remnant consciousness. It's indeed spectacular. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that such souls existed in this world. After all, souls are precious treasures and resources because of everything they've experienced in their lives. If they don't have enough experience and understanding, the quality of their souls will be very low. But these, even though there's nothing, are all top-notch souls without exception. As he spoke, the boy released his energy and attracted all the souls in the surroundings. In less than a minute, these souls were broken into the tiniest units and gathered into sealed jars. "What are you doing?" Luke's eyes shone with curiosity. "Of course, I'm collecting a portion and looking for an opportunity to study it." "Don't tell me you didn't feel that faint attraction," the boy replied meaningfully. "It's indeed a little suspicious. Let's not talk about where all these soul fragments came from. Just that strange attraction alone is worth paying attention to. From what I know, the attraction of souls usually means some kind of intimate relationship. But this is clearly our first time here." Luke rubbed his chin and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Just as the two of them were daydreaming about these soul fragments, the ground suddenly trembled slightly. Before they could react, the originally calm lake water suddenly surged with a huge wave that was more than 10 meters tall. "Careful! Retreat quickly!" The boy pulled Luke up and cast a short-distance teleportation spell without any explanation, completing several spatial jumps in a row. But interestingly, this wave seemed to have a life of its own. It continued to chase after them without any signs of weakening. Without a doubt, this strange state clearly didn't conform to the principles of mechanical transmission. There must be some kind of power behind it. Chapter 1363. How is it? Did you discover anything? After leaping to a distance of about 300 to 400 meters from the shore, the boy stopped and stared at the strange wave that was constantly wandering around the shore. It had to be said that a black wave was like an animal, constantly wandering around the edge of the lake. It did give people a very absurd and awkward feeling. But what really bothered him was not the wave itself, but the invisible force that was controlling it. Because until now, he still had not figured out what it was that could control the black lake water that even he could not do anything about. Compared to his brother, Luke's energy perception was obviously more delicate and sensitive. He could detect some subtle details that were deliberately hidden. He did not immediately answer. Instead, he bent down and carefully picked up a stone, injected a little energy into it, and threw it toward a black object floating on the surface of the lake in the distance. Although 300 to 400 meters was a distance that was difficult for most ordinary people to cross, it only took a few seconds for a stone that was affected by energy to cross it. The moment the stone came into contact with the black floating object, a blinding red flame suddenly spewed out, directly enveloping the entire target. The next second, boom! A huge fireball soared into the air, instantly breaking the calm surface of the dark lake. But this was not the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing was that the thing that looked like a floating object just now jumped out of the black lake water and turned around at an extremely fast speed to swim deeper into the lake. As most of the Tower of Babel's body was immersed in the black lake water that did not reflect light at all, it could only be vaguely distinguished that it was a life form with strong upper limbs and a lower body that was humanoid. "What is that?" The boy's pupils suddenly contracted. "Don't ask me, I'm not too sure either. I only know that it was secretly attacking us just now," Luke replied with a shrug of his shoulders. To be honest, although the sudden appearance of the huge black wave looked very dangerous, it actually did not cause much damage. Not to mention that both of them had extremely powerful spellcasting abilities. Just the teleportation magic alone determined that something like the wave, which moved extremely slowly, would not be able to hit them unless it lost consciousness. Watching the attacker gradually disappear into the depths of the lake, the boy rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. Soon, he smiled and muttered to himself, "Unknown intelligent life form? This place is getting more and more interesting." "You call this interesting? I think a thriller would be more suitable." "Don't be careless. This place is 100 times more dangerous than the Dalant City," Luke warned. There was no other way. As a person with exceptionally sharp senses, this place was like a huge maze to him, and the black lake water everywhere was the walls. No one knew what kind of surprise or shock would emerge from the water in the next moment. There was no doubt that keeping one's nerves in a tense state for a long time was definitely not a choice that a smart person would make. Without a doubt, the boy knew this very well. He grinned and said, "No matter what happened just now proved my guess." The most unknown mysteries of the Dalant species and civilization were definitely hidden in this place. "So, are you ready to go on an exciting adventure with me?" "Do you think I have a choice?" Luke asked with a sneer. The more time they spent together, the more he realized that this masked brother was almost exactly the same as himself in terms of thinking and behavior. Most of the time, there was no need for words. Often, they could understand each other's meaning with just a look. This kind of tacit understanding, this kind of coordination between the heart and the soul, it was indescribable with words. "All right, now's not the time to show your sense of humor. I have a feeling that the road ahead won't be too peaceful." As he spoke, the boy took the lead and walked into the depths of the black, viscous lake water. Due to the abnormal density and buoyancy of the lake water, ordinary things could not sink at all. Instead, they would float on the surface. Especially for a boy who weighed less than 30 kilograms, it was impossible for him to even put his feet under the water. The two of them were less than half a meter apart from each other as they carefully moved forward. No matter what kind of floating object they found along the way, they would try to touch it without exception to at least ensure that it was not a living being. Just as they were about to reach the center of the dark lake, ripples suddenly appeared out of thin air. The source of these ripples was a stone pillar in the center of the meeting place. Different from the pitch-black color of the surroundings, this pillar was pure white like a tooth and constantly emitted a mysterious halo. At the same time, mysterious guild-like symbols would flash on the surface of the white and smooth pillar from time to time. These symbols were arranged in an irregular pattern from the top all the way to the bottom of the water. Every time they flashed, the positions of the symbols would change. It was like an extremely complicated code waiting to be deciphered. "Looks like we've reached the place." The boy stopped in his tracks, his eyes shining with a fiery light. As someone who had grown up in the Darantion society, he knew better than anyone else just how shocking the secret behind this powerful magic civilization was. Now, this secret was finally placed in front of him. How were the first Dalant people born? Who was the god who created them? What was the power of the shadows? Where did the soul fragments under the Black Lake come from? There were too many questions that needed to be answered. Just as the boy stepped forward and tried to touch the stone pillar with his right hand, a black shadow suddenly jumped out of the lake and pounced on him like a madman. The other party had obviously been planning this for a long time. The speed of the attack was fast and sudden. However, before the two parties could make contact, Luke, who was on guard at the side, completed a force field wall. There was no surprise. The black shadow slammed into the invisible force field wall and turned into a puddle of viscous liquid like mud. However, in just 2 or 3 seconds, the liquid flowed along the force field wall and fell into the black lake water, reforming into a humanoid shape. There was no need to ask to know that it did not have a fixed shape. Once it was affected by external forces, it would lose the shape that it had painstakingly gathered. Chapter 1364. Asterisk smack. 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 Asterisk the unknown creature seemed to have gone mad, as it kept hitting the force field wall. No matter how many times it failed, it had no intention of giving up. Its strange behavior undoubtedly aroused the boy's interest. He stood where he was and asked with interest, "Who are you? Or should I say, what are you? Can you understand what I'm saying?" "Ah!" The unknown creature let out a low cry, as if it was responding or venting the anger in its heart. "All right, looks like you can't communicate." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Without another word, he raised his hand and shot out a blinding energy beam. This was a positive energy spell created and deeply developed by the Dalent. It could be used according to the caster's ability, from burning through a piece of paper to purifying a city full of undead. Because there weren't too many fancy movements and complicated incantations, it was very popular among the casters. After the beam hit, a huge hole appeared in the unknown creature's body. Normally, it would be difficult for a construct to survive such a heavy injury. Interestingly, not only did the unknown creature survive, it continued to repeat its retarded actions as if it wasn't injured at all. The only difference was that its size seemed to have shrunk a little. Don't waste your energy. Its life is closely connected to the lake water, and it can continuously replenish itself. If you really want to kill it, you must first cut off its connection with the lake water, then evaporate it all at once. Luke, who had been observing from the side, reminded the boy. "You mean, I can't get rid of this annoying little thing for now?" The boy turned around with a surprised expression. Luke nodded without hesitation. "That's right. We can't kill it at this stage. However, it clearly doesn't have mature intelligence, so it's not difficult to block its attacks. The only thing we need to be wary of is—" Before he could finish his sentence, the unknown creature suddenly stopped its endless ramming against the force field wall and dived into the bottom of the black lake. The next second, a huge wave rose into the sky and slammed down from above. "Damn it! That's what I wanted to say." Luke cursed under his breath and instantly teleported hundreds of meters away, avoiding this earth-shattering attack. The boy stood where he was and used his superb casting skills to create a semicircular force field that covered him from head to toe. When the huge wave passed, not only was there not a drop of black lake water on his body, but the stone pillar was also within the protective range of the force field. With this, the unknown creature could only vent its anger and could no longer get within 30 meters of the pillar. Seeing that the enemy was helpless, the boy smiled nonchalantly and began to put all his energy into recording the constantly changing runes on the surface of the pillar. 1 hour, 2 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, after a full 100 hours, he rubbed his eyes were exhausted. "I finally recorded all the symbols. The next step is to decipher them. Decipher and interpret them. Are you sure?" Luke raised his eyebrows and questioned. After all, the home planet of the Dalent was not a safe place, especially since the two of them had a huge fight before. Even an idiot would know that the enemy must have sent more people to search for them. "What else? I don't think those guys will be able to find this place." The boy's lips curled into a meaningful smile. However, the smile on his face froze in less than 10 seconds. A few black figures stepped on the lake water and appeared on the shore less than 1,000 meters away from the stone pillar. No, what did I just say?" The corner of Luke's mouth twitched. That familiar feeling. The way they used their energy was extremely similar. There was no need to ask to know that these guys were the remaining members of the Shadow Guards. "Sometimes I really want to tear that mouth of yours off and study it to see if it contains any curse power. Stop talking nonsense and go. This is not a good time to have a direct confrontation with them." The boy rolled his eyes in annoyance and tore open a chaotic spatial fissure without another word and went in. As you wish. Luke waved his hands nonchalantly and followed him into the cave. As soon as the two of them disappeared, these guys with the same aura as the Black Lake rushed to the side of the stone pillar. The leader of the group raised his fist and slammed it into the unknown lifeform, sending it flying dozens of meters away. He then ordered without looking back, "Locate them immediately. I want to know where they have escaped to within 200 breath." "Sorry, I can't fulfill your request." In order to escape capture, they did not open a directional portal but a chaotic portal. You should know that chaos means uncertainty, so they could have entered any world. Another member explained helplessly. "Shut up. I don't want to hear excuses. I only want answers. Don't forget, the condition that the council gave us is to kill them or bring them back alive within a set time. Once we complete the mission, we can break free from the imprisonment and exile that has lasted for thousands of years and return to the tribe to obtain power, wealth, and glory. Tell me, do you want these things?" The leader grabbed his subordinate by the neck and asked sternly. The latter replied without hesitation, "Yes. Of course I do. But the problem is, according to the traces left behind at the scene, finding them is as difficult as finding a stone in this lake. Perhaps we should think of another way." "Agreed. If I'm not mistaken, one of the boys recorded the runes on the Pillar of Creation. If nothing goes wrong, they will definitely try to decipher it. This also means that once they succeed, they will trigger the shadow effect. If there is an intelligent tribe nearby, then this tribe will be summoned and the dead god will be awakened once again. Yes. We just need to monitor the passage and find out where the shadow energy suddenly appears, and we will be able to locate their hiding place. Then what are we waiting for? Act now. Remember, no matter what method we use, we cannot fail this mission. Not only does it concern the glory of the Shadow Guards, but it also concerns the future of each of us. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1365. Where is this? After several hours of drifting through space and time, Luke looked around as soon as his feet touched the ground. As a child who grew up in a relatively isolated environment, he had never left the world he grew up in, so he was extremely sensitive to changes in his environment. In comparison, while the boy rarely left the place he lived in, the Dalant had a flourishing magical civilization. Whether it was books or videos, there was a large amount of information about other worlds. This is Ankas, a special planet where all life forms live in the underground world. He replied without hesitation after taking a quick glance at the dark underground tunnel. This is Ankas, a special planet where all life forms live underground. Looks like we're quite lucky. Quite lucky? Luke frowned subconsciously, completely unable to understand what the boy was trying to say. After all, a dark and claustrophobic environment often meant extreme danger. Moreover, when under attack, one could not casually use teleportation magic. Who knew if one would be stuck in a rock and crushed into minced meat in the next second? Of course, Ankas is the only place that the Dalant have abandoned. To be more precise, they once tried to conquer this place, but unexpectedly failed. This is because the core of this planet constantly emits a strange energy field, causing all spells that can be used normally in other worlds to mutate to a certain extent. At this point, the boy suddenly paused, a profound expression appearing on his face. Do you know what mutation means? Could it be a chaotic area of magic? Luke asked in an uncertain tone. From what he knew, the only situation where spells with stable models would mutate was a chaotic area of magic. The boy smiled and shook his head. No. If it were that simple, the Dalant would have conquered this place long ago. In fact, even in the end, they still did not understand what that strange energy field was. However, one thing is certain. If you use spells here, no matter how powerful they are, there is a 90% chance that it will cause the caster to die on the spot. Trust me, you won't know how painful it is to die like this. So, on this planet, neither you nor I can use the power of magic? Luke's pupils suddenly contracted. That's right. No matter if it's you or me, unless absolutely necessary, we can't use magic. Because once you use it, it's equivalent to handing your life over to fate. After saying that, the boy took off all the magical items on his body one by one and stuffed them into the magic pouch that he carried with him. Then, he picked out a short sword that was emitting light blue light and inserted it into his belt. Damn it. Now, I really hope that I didn't slack off when the elders taught me martial arts. Luke grumbled helplessly as he took off all sorts of magical rings, amulets, and other trinkets. Because he was too obsessed with the power of magic when he was young, he inevitably neglected other aspects, especially hand-to-hand combat techniques that were seen as symbols of primitive, ignorant, barbaric, and stupid. If he didn't use magic, he wasn't even sure if he could defeat a small carnivore. Ha 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 ha. Relax. Perhaps we have lost our powerful spellcasting abilities, but our brains and wisdom are still perfectly preserved. Just based on this point alone, he could easily integrate into this world. In addition, I suggest that you take some time to learn the language of this world from me. All right, I'll listen to you. Hurry up. The Shadow Guards won't sit by and watch us unravel the truth that the Dalent's people have been trying to hide. Integrating into a foreign environment or even a foreign world was never an easy task. Just the complicated pronunciation of this world, as well as the strange grammar, was enough to make Luke, who prided himself on his intelligence, suffer. The boy used a full half a month's effort to barely master the most basic of communication and corners. As time was of the essence, the two of them didn't have any more time to stay and learn the language in depth. They immediately followed the spacious tunnel and headed deep underground. Anka's was a huge underground world made up of countless tunnels, caves, underground rivers, lakes, and oceans. Of course, the underground world didn't mean that there was no light. The moss above his head, which was emitting star-like light, was the best lighting in the world. Although the light was very dim, to the point that Luke, who was used to living on the surface, was not used to it, he could still see the situation within a few dozen meters. Other than that, the oddly shaped plants and small animals also attracted his attention all the time. For example, there was a crustacean that looked like a rock, but had a dozen feet hidden underneath. Another example was a flat-shaped flying creature that constantly hovered around the fluorescent moss. They swallowed the luminous buns that fell from the edge of the moss, and at the same time, they emitted a colorful light. This underground world was so beautiful and exciting, not at all inferior to the surface world. If there was anything to be regretted, it would undoubtedly be the sound. For some reason, the animals and plants here were very quiet. Only the water dripping from the huge stalagmites above his head made a crisp sound. How much longer do we have to walk to reach a safe place? Luke asked without turning his head as he gnawed on the unknown blue moss. Because the two of them had been in this world for more than 16 days, almost every day they relied on a small amount of nutritious plants to satisfy their hunger. His mouth was filled with a bitter taste, and he was about to go crazy. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't use magic, he would definitely kill a few animals to see if their meat was edible. The boy bent down and carefully checked the ground of the nearby tunnel. After a while, he stood up and replied, "Don't worry, we're almost there. If nothing unexpected happens, we'll reach a small town in at most a few hours. But before that, I have a few things to remind you of." "What are they?" Luke asked impatiently. "First, don't talk to any females alone. Because in this world, females are 100 times more dangerous than males. Some females even cruelly kill their spouses, devouring their flesh and soul. Secondly, don't drink anything that anyone gives you, even if it's water that seems harmless, because those drinks often have some interesting things added to them that can make us outsiders lose our rationality. Lastly, and most importantly, you have to pretend that you don't know me." Chapter 1366. After passing through the last section of the narrow tunnel, the two finally saw the wall at the end of the tunnel. It was a semi-curved defensive building made of huge stones that were cut from an unknown place. In the middle there was an arched entrance. Two humanoid creatures with dark gray skin were standing guard at the side. Judging from their figures and appearance, they were most likely female, and their faces had a lot of insect-like features, such as antennae on their foreheads and large eyes that were disproportionately large. "Are they the natives of this world?" Luke asked his brother through complicated sign language. Due to the unique environment, if they were to use language to communicate, it might expose their location, so the two came up with a set of sign language. In this way, even if they did not need to make a sound, they could still discuss an important matter within a certain distance, or even send an alarm to each other. That's right. The Eniots, a special intelligent life form that combines the advantages of insects and mammals. According to the Dalent's investigation, they should have risen 60,000 years ago. They are a very ancient race with an independent culture and tradition. It is also because of this culture and tradition that they are unable to evolve in a more advanced direction. The boy said everything he knew through sign language. However, it wasn't hard to see from his eyes that it was the first time he saw these strange intelligent life forms, and his gaze was filled with curiosity. After all, seeing them in books and videos was one thing, and seeing them with one's own eyes was another. What an interesting race. I can sense a completely different kind of power from them. Luke was very careful as he hid himself in a dark corner. He realized that the pair of strange antennae on the other party's head wasn't just for decoration, but a very sensitive detection organ. It's an energy force field. Every Eniot, from birth to death, is closely connected to the core of this planet. They are like the darlings of this world, and no matter how powerful an outsider is, they will be suppressed by the force field. Believe me, unless absolutely necessary, it's best not to clash with them. After saying this sentence full of warning, the boy led the way out of the corner and walked toward the entrance of the town. When he was a dozen meters away from the arched door, a guard immediately raised a spear that emitted green fluorescence and shouted, "Stop, stranger! Tell me your name and purpose." "Hello, madam. I'm a traveler from another world. I'm tired and hungry right now. I hope I can get permission to enter the town to have a warm meal and then have a good sleep. In return, I'm willing to provide some interesting gadget." The boy bowed politely and took out a small piece of jewelry from his pocket. It had a weak magic power, but it would not cause any abnormalities in the force field. A traveler from another world? The female guard looked up and down with her ridiculously proportioned eyes. At the same time, she didn't forget to pick and choose from the trinket. In the end, she chose a pale yellow pin and pointed at the only entrance to the town. "Go in. Remember, don't try to break our laws and rules, or else." "No problem. I'm not one of those self-righteous fools." The boy smiled and bowed to express his gratitude before quickly disappearing from sight. Obviously, there was no lack of outsiders in this world, so the local residents had long been accustomed to this, and did not show the slightest bit of surprise from beginning to end. When Luke, who was hiding in the corner, saw this scene, he also imitated him. However, he gave himself the identity of a merchant, and showed some crops that did not exist in this world. Without a doubt, food was very important to any civilization. Especially since Anka's was an underground world, most of the crops were fungi. There were no pollinating plants, and there were no sweets like honey or sugar. Thus, after Luke used a little of the resources stored in his magic pouch, he immediately received better treatment than his brothers. Even the mayor came out personally, intending to buy the food he brought with him at a high price, especially the various seeds that could be planted. As an underground world that extended in all directions, there was no lack of minerals. Gold, silver, gems, and magical metals that were considered treasures in most worlds had long since become a disaster in this world. Just find a tunnel and dig down, and you'll always find one or two good mineral veins. However, in contrast to minerals, the spices, and food here were very expensive. Many relatively poor residents could only afford to eat meat every meal, because meat could be obtained by raising several kinds of animals that fed on moss. It was very cheap. Sitting at the table in the luxurious living room, Luke was eating a fresh steak as he jokingly said, "Madam Mayor, you have no idea how I survived the past few days when I was lost. Apart from the dry rations I brought with me, the only thing I could eat was moss." "Moss? You didn't eat the moss, did you?" A female Anaroot who appeared to be older showed a surprised expression. Needless to say, she was the ruler of this town, and at the same time, the person with the most power. After all, this world did not have any so-called democratic elections. Instead, whoever had the most power would be the supreme leader. Of course, this power did not only refer to violence. There was also an important reference factor, and that was fertility. That's right. It was the ability to reproduce. Usually, the woman who gave birth to the most children would be recognized by the majority. Just like the records of the people of Dalent, this was a world where women were the dominant force, and men were nothing more than accessories to women. Take this mayor in front of him for example. She married 12 husbands, and the youngest among them was standing beside the dining table, responsible for serving food and cleaning up the trash. He didn't even have the right to sit down. Oh? Is that blue moss called bitter moss? No wonder it tastes bitter and astringent. Luke deliberately pretended to be enlightened. It seems like you ate moss. In fact, in our world, not all moss is suitable for food. Only a very few carefully cultivated moss can be served on the table. As for the moss that can be seen everywhere, most of it is used to feed livestock. Come, try this, and then you'll understand the difference between moss and moss. Chapter 1367. Without a doubt, to any world and any race, food was always a topic that could bring people closer to each other. This was because most life forms had to eat as long as they were alive to replenish the various nutrients their bodies needed. This was especially true for intelligent life forms. When a civilization developed to a certain extent, they would no longer be satisfied with simply filling their stomach. Instead, they would begin to pursue taste, color, style, and so on. Even though Luke was born on an extremely barren planet, he had absorbed sufficient knowledge from the Great Library. He easily dealt with the other party's slight probing and even obtained a certain degree of trust. When the female mayor turned around and left, the guards outside the door had already withdrawn, leaving only a few servants waiting for orders. Due to the fact that parts of the underground world were day and night, the Enyat people's schedule was completely irregular. No matter what time it was, half of them would be awake while the other half would be resting. Therefore, the town always maintained a half-dead state. It was neither overly lively nor deserted. Just as Luke stood on the balcony and observed this wonderful world from above, the door that was originally tightly shut suddenly made a clicking sound. Immediately after, the boy who had passed through the entrance first sneaked in and asked with a smile, "How was it? Was the female mayor very enthusiastic?" "Very enthusiastic indeed. Why, is there a problem?" Luke asked without turning his head. "Of course there's a problem. I just investigated the population structure of this town. Guess what I found?" The boy's tone revealed a hint of schadenfreude. When Luke heard this, he could no longer remain calm. He turned around with a face full of curiosity. This was because he knew that his brother wouldn't scare him for no reason. There must be something strange about this town. It's very simple. According to my investigation, I found that the ratio of males to females here is an astonishing 7-3. In other words, the female population is more than twice the male population. What's interesting is that in terms of birth rate, there's not much difference between males and females. In fact, the male birth rate is slightly higher. Take a guess, where did those men who mysteriously disappeared go? The boy revealed the contents of his investigation with a smile that wasn't a smile. Could it be? Luke seemed to have realized something and his expression instantly turned ugly. The boy nodded without hesitation. You guessed right. Those men who had mysteriously disappeared had all had some kind of intimate relationship with the mayor. To be sure, all the offspring not born by her had almost without exception disappeared from the town. According to the most basic causality, I think she seems to be using this method to satisfy her strong desire to have children. I don't understand. What does this have to do with us? Luke frowned subconsciously. On the surface, it doesn't seem to matter much. But if you think about it carefully, haven't you noticed that she's always been interested in underage males? The boy reminded him meaningfully. Damn it. You mean, I've become one of the targets? Luke's mouth twitched slightly. No wonder when they were eating just now. He felt that there was an abnormal infatuation in her eyes. So that was the problem. Yes. I warned you not to be too ostentatious and not to be alone with the Enyat women, but you didn't listen. Now tell me, how do you plan to get rid of this female mayor who is ready to swallow you whole? Don't think that this is an exaggeration. On the contrary, it's the most appropriate description. With that, the boy sat down in front of the table filled with all kinds of snacks and started eating without holding back. One had to know that he came in as a traveler from another world, so his treatment was completely different from Luke. He could only scrounge up some of the town's taverns and eat some of the town's special stew with a slightly sour taste. Eat her whole? That female mayor eats people? Didn't I mention before that the Enyat are a life form that fuses the characteristics of insects and mammals? Therefore, they naturally retain some of their biological characteristics. Although they gradually became civilized in the tens of thousands of years of evolution, that doesn't mean that some ancient traditions didn't remain. It was obvious that the mayor was a supporter of tradition. She would seduce all underage males to mate with her, and then kill them after getting pregnant, eating every part of their bodies. In the knowledge of the Enyat, this is to fuse the best part of them with the other party and give birth to the most perfect offspring, the boy explained patiently while eating. However, judging from his slightly mocking tone, he didn't treat this matter as a crisis, but as an interesting joke. The corner of Luke's mouth twitched and he mocked himself helplessly. This is why I've always hated insects. Tell me, what's your plan? It's simple. Stall for time. Before the official mating, she shouldn't do anything to you, so you'll be safe during this time. We have to make full use of this time to decipher the symbols copied from the stone pillars. Here, this is your share, I'll take care of the rest. The boy straightforwardly threw a black stone slab that the Dalant used to record knowledge and information on the table. Here? In this strange town? Luke raised his eyebrows in surprise. In his impression, in order to ensure the minimum safety, the other party should at least find a secluded place to hide. The boy sneered and replied, "Of course. Do you think it's easy to find a safe place in this world? No. I can tell you that the most dangerous places are precisely the areas where no one lives. Otherwise, why do you think no one lives there? Moreover, even if this town is a little dangerous, you and I can definitely deal with it with our brains. Moreover, if something abnormal happens during the deciphering process, we can bury this town and completely conceal the truth." Understood. I'll start deciphering as soon as possible. But before that, it's best if you scatter these seeds in every corner of the town just in case. This is... these are the gifts I prepared for the female mayor. If one day she can't resist the primitive and wild desires in her heart, I'll activate these seeds. I'm looking forward to that day. Chapter 1368. As the insurance was spread around the town, the two boys finally began to decipher the mysterious symbols in an orderly manner. As the prey being targeted, Luke did not show the slightest bit of fear from beginning to end. Instead, he dealt with the female mayor who wanted to eat him with ease. Just like that, a few months passed in the blink of an eye as they played back and forth with each other. When the female mayor's body emitted more and more pheromones, she became more and more dangerous and explicit. The deciphering work finally made a decisive progress. To be precise, it was the most important and most frequently appearing rune. Under the cooperation of the two boys, it finally revealed its true form. "Are you sure this is the part we've been looking for?" Luke raised his head and asked in a doubtful tone. Deciphering a systematic writing system from scratch, especially a writing system with certain magical characteristics, was extremely difficult, and the workload was simply far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. For this reason, he was even prepared to spend a few decades quietly in this world. But now, the dawn of victory had actually appeared before his eyes. The boy's mood was obviously a little excited. He nodded without hesitation and said, "Of course. I'm very sure. Haven't you noticed that all the connecting parts of the runes are connected by this? This also means that these symbols are not arranged in a messy and disorderly manner as we initially expected. Instead, they are very systematic in describing something. So, that pillar is very likely to record the secret of the Dalent's origin?" Luke's eyes flashed with excitement and anticipation. "I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's the only clue we have now. Besides, have you forgotten that monster that can't be killed no matter how hard you try? I have a hunch that it's also a part of this secret." Having said that, the boy carefully engraved the symbol into the device that he had prepared beforehand. It was for no other reason than to temporarily block the interference of the nuclear force field on the magical energy. In an instant, the originally ordinary rune suddenly released a dark purple light. Immediately after, it affected the energy in the surrounding environment at an unbelievable speed. The next second, bang! The entire device exploded on the spot and formed a small passage that led to an unknown space. However, the time that the passage was opened was too short. It disappeared in less than a second. Feeling the residual aura of the void in the air, Luke licked his lips and asked in an uncertain tone, "What was that just now?" "Some kind of power system that we don't understand. It seems that the birth of the Dalent is more complicated and mysterious than we expected. Besides, don't you find it strange? Why did we ignore such a vast and boundless universe and appear on the home planet of the Dalent at the same time?" The boy narrowed his eyes and asked several questions in one breath. "According to what you're saying, the weak resonance of the soul fragments under the dark lake isn't our misconception, but related to the prophet's prophecy?" Luke seemed to have thought of something as he stroked his smooth chin and fell into deep thought. As a person with a strong skepticism, he had never really believed in anything. Therefore, he had a certain degree of doubt about what had happened recently. Even this brother in front of him was no exception. Most importantly, the spatial passage that opened just now should have exposed our location. If nothing unexpected happens, the Dalent's expeditionary army and shadow guards will soon descend again. This time, the Eniots will no longer be facing small skirmishes. Instead, it will be the merciless crushing of a lower civilization by a higher civilization. What does the life and death of this world and its inhabitants have to do with us? Survival and destruction are part of the cycle of the universe to begin with. Even if we reach the peak of all mortal civilizations, we can't escape the fate of extinction. Luke shrugged nonchalantly. The sense of identity and belonging was what most intelligent beings pursued their entire life. It was also the external manifestation of collective consciousness. Regrettably, this feeling never appeared on him. Whether it was the elders of the tribe who taught and raised him with great care, or the other tribes that he came into contact with later, Luke had always maintained an absolutely clear and independent ideology. It was as if he had understood the world and the universe, and he had understood that he was different from the other lives around him. The boy undoubtedly had similar thoughts. He laughed and agreed. "You're right. What does the life and death of this world's inhabitants have to do with us? But if a war breaks out between them, it will definitely disturb the energy field of this planet's core. At that time, some experiments that are inconvenient to do now can be put into action. Yes, chaos is a staircase to a higher level, while war is a cruel process of elimination. Only those who survive will have the qualifications to continue living and leave behind their excellent genes. Since that's the case, let's prepare a gift for the Dalent's people." Just as a sinister smile appeared on the faces of the two boys, a Shadow Guard member far away in the center of Mocha's dark lake suddenly stood up from the ground. His eyes shone with the same brilliance as he loudly exclaimed, "Shadow effect! Found them! I found them!" "What? Found them? Really?" The leader's eyes widened. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. "That's right. They're on Ankas right now. The world that was once abandoned by the Expeditionary Army. Ankas? If I remember correctly, that's a world with a strange energy field around its core. It's quite unfavorable for us who rely heavily on energy. Damn it. It seems that this matter needs to be reported to the Council. Only by borrowing the power of the entire civilization can we conquer this planet and find those two dangerous bastards. Ask the Council for help? I understand. Doing this will definitely cause us to lose a lot of bargaining chip. But to ensure the success rate, we must ask the Council for help this time. Agreed. Compared to a little loss of power, success is the most important. I'm tired of this life of hiding in a dark corner all day. I want to walk under the sun again, no matter what price I have to pay. Chapter 1369. To the Dalent, who were passionate about expansion, conquest, and plunder, war was as easy as eating and drinking. Especially after the Parliament issued a full mobilization order, this huge war machine was quickly put into full operation. In less than 15 days, more than 20 expeditionary armies were quickly established, and more than half of them were veterans who had served in the military. In addition, some powerful weapons and equipment that ordinary expeditionary armies could not obtain at all were fully equipped this time. It could be said that they were armed to the teeth. In order to ensure that the unprecedentedly large army could reach their destination quickly, they also specially built a one-way ultra-long-distance portal. Relying on the knowledge, technology, resources, and cohesion brought by the advanced magic civilization, the Parliament finally allowed the Shadow Guards to take the lead in entering this special world that once made the Dalent flinch before the army was about to set off. At the same time, they also gave them the right to act independently. However, this did not mean that the Shadow Guards, who had always been dissociated from the power system, had obtained the approval of the highest authority. On the contrary, anyone who knew their origin and the source of their power would be extremely vigilant. No one wanted to see the revival of theocracy, and no one wanted to see the god who once loomed over the entire race come back to life. After watching the last member of the Shadow Guards disappear into the portal, the speaker finally took a deep breath and ordered in an extremely low and hoarse voice, "Get all the troops ready. We will launch the attack in 7 hours. Remember, this time we don't need any resources or captive. Use the fastest speed to destroy the geocentric force field of this planet." 7 hours. Another member of the Parliament next to him was surprised. "Didn't you promise the Shadow Guards to give them at least 70 hours of search time?" "Humph. Of course I lied to them. I won't let them have the chance to touch power, and I won't allow them to integrate into the entire race. There are some things that absolutely cannot be compromised. Otherwise, after the first opening, there will be a second, a third, and so on. Think about it. After those old fellows who have lived in darkness for thousands of years have tasted power, would they still be willing to protect our most important secrets? No, they won't. They will do everything they can to fight for more power for themselves, even if it means that the entire race will return to the dark era of theocracy. When he said this, the chairman did not hide his wariness and hostility towards the Shadow Guards at all. He believed that if it weren't for the fact that the Parliament had a firm grip on that item, the Shadow Guards wouldn't have obeyed their orders so obediently. In fact, at the very beginning, he had a considerable degree of expectations and good impression of the Shadow Guards, but after the negotiation, he found that he was a little too naive and wishful thinking. Understood. I'll pass on the message right away. The councilman nodded thoughtfully. 7 hours might be plenty of time for one person to prepare, but for an army of millions, it would undoubtedly be very chaotic and hurried. Even the Dalent, who worshipped order, couldn't avoid some unexpected situations. Fortunately, these small incidents did not affect the overall situation. When the first wave of invading troops stood in front of the huge portal, the Grand War finally began. There was no warning, no diplomacy. There was also no declaration of war that was seen as a symbol of civilization. There was only merciless slaughter and suppression. Due to the special environment of this world, the first wave of invading troops had no spellcasters at all, only warriors and alchemy puppets. They used their flesh and blood to conquer a dozen cities in one go, and opened up the entire region to build a permanent large-scale transit base. As for the natives, they had long been slaughtered. Even the unhatched eggs couldn't escape the disaster. Because the Dalent, who had experienced defeat, knew very well that the oviparous Enyat had an ability that was more terrifying than any known race, and that was their unparalleled fertility. That's right. These strange-looking intelligent life forms were actually oviparous. More interestingly, when entering a state of war, every female could overdraft their own life force to greatly increase their fertility rate and the growth of their young. In other words, the inhabitants of this planet had the ability to increase their population by thousands of times in a short period of time, using the most terrifying numbers to drown the enemy. When the base was more or less finished, the second wave of spellcasters finally arrived. When they arrived, the first thing they did wasn't to set up magic nodes and defense systems for the base, but to gather together and install pre-prepared devices in special positions one after another. When the last device was installed, the mysterious force field that originally surrounded the air was suddenly forcefully suppressed to an extremely low level. After a few male spellcasters tried to cast a few spells, they immediately revealed ecstatic smiles. Because within the effective area of these devices, they could boldly use all kinds of magic without worrying about suddenly exploding or losing control of their psyche spells. See, what did I say? They're here. Sensing the constantly changing force field in the air, the boy suddenly put down his deciphering work and raised his head to look into the distance from the balcony. Even though in this dim underground world, he couldn't even see the scene 50 meters away. They're here? The Dalent's expeditionary army. Luke narrowed his eyes and stood up vigilantly. That's right. But this time, it's not only the expeditionary army, but also the Shadow Guards. How about it, are you ready to start fleeing with me? If nothing unexpected happens, the Shadow Guards should already be on their way to this town. As he spoke, the boy greedily licked his lips and cast his gaze toward the clueless female mayor, who was still planning to hold a traditional ceremony tonight. Luke had undoubtedly noticed this as well. He asked with a smile, "So? I don't need to continue enduring?" The boy nodded without hesitation. "That's right. Go do what you've always wanted to do. No matter what this town becomes, it has nothing to do with us anymore." "Great. Now, let me use the blood and souls of these dirty and ugly worms to create a beautiful garden." As soon as he finished speaking, Luke took out a seed that emitted a dark green light from his bosom and casually tossed it out the window. The next second, the entire underground of the town suddenly shook violently. Chapter 1370. Bastard! Who can tell me what's going on? The female mayor stared in horror at the plants that were wreaking havoc in the town and couldn't help but scream. She wasn't the only one. Almost all the residents in the town who were still alive were stunned by the unbelievable disaster in front of them. In less than a minute, all kinds of huge plants that they had never seen before rose from the ground and forcibly changed the surrounding environment and even the terrain. At this moment, the entire town seemed to be situated in the middle of a dense forest. Whether it was the vines that could crush a house or the flowers that looked beautiful but actually devoured people without spitting out the bones, they were all frantically hunting down the remaining survivors. Unable to use magic to directly interfere with the movements of the magic plants, they relied entirely on the most primitive plant instinct to do their best to absorb nutrients so that they could become stronger and stronger before they died. This was an underground world without the illumination of the stars, so all the surface plants that needed to photosynthesize were doomed to not live long. Even the magic plants that relied on absorbing energy to maintain their growth were no exception. In order to prolong their destined short lifespan, every plant hunted and killed their prey crazily, transforming them into nutrients and energy to store. Ma-am, let's run away quickly. This town is finished. The young servant kept retreating incoherently, his eyes full of horror. As an underground world without daylight, the most common plants here were moss and mushrooms. They had never seen such destructive vines and cannibal flowers that could swallow a living person in one bite. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that he was in such a state. However, the female mayor, who had a strong desire to possess and rule, obviously couldn't tolerate the foundation that she had painstakingly built for decades being destroyed just like that. She grabbed the male servant, opened her mouth, revealed her sharp mandibles, and bit off his throat, greedily sucking the scorching blood. About a minute later, she threw the completely dead body aside. While licking the remaining blood at the corner of her mouth, she ordered the guards beside her, who were also her biological daughters, "Go! Gather your brothers and sisters immediately. No matter who is behind this, I will make him pay the price of blood." "As you wish, mother." The eldest woman hurriedly bent down and bowed deeply. As the eldest daughter, she knew better than the siblings who were born later how terrifying her mother was. Anyone who dared to go against her will would die a horrible death without mercy. Not long after, hundreds of fully armed guards consisting of young men and women were quickly gathered. There was no need to ask to know that these were the descendants of the female mayor over the years. They were his sons, daughters, and even grandchildren. With the bloodline connection and unparalleled deterrence, the mayor was the supreme queen of this group. It could even be said that she was the queen of the swarm. Children, I know that all of you are very scared right now and are eager to leave this dangerous town where you could lose your lives at any time. But the problem is that once we leave our nest, we will lose our foundation and become a group of homeless wanderers. Think about it. How have we dealt with the wanderers over the years? The female mayor asked loudly, forcing herself to be calm. Mother is right. If we escape from here, what awaits us next will be endless suffering and death. Even if it is for ourselves and our descendants, we must find the culprit and restore everything to its original state. The eldest daughter took the initiative to stand up and help. But unfortunately, these encouraging words did not resonate with these so-called relatives. The reason was very simple. Their previous relationship was not maintained by affection, but by a series of complicated things such as power, strength, and bloodline. So what this group of silent people yearned for the most was for the female tyrant to die quickly so that they could regain their freedom. The female mayor undoubtedly noticed the subtle emotions and immediately became somewhat furious. Her whole body emitted a chilling aura. But before she could vent her accumulated anger, a familiar voice suddenly sounded behind her. "Ah, hello, dear madam. Why, you haven't left yet. It's you." The female mayor turned around abruptly and saw two boys who looked almost identical walking out of the dilapidated house. "That's right. You've already guessed it, haven't you?" Luke nodded with a smile, his face full of ridicule. After all, there were only 2 outsiders in the town during this period of time. So even if one used their butts to think, they would know that these 2 were the most suspicious. Why are you doing this? The female mayor asked loudly, clenching her fists tightly. Luke responded without hesitation. Of course it's to take revenge on your disgusting desires and behavior. Do you know? Every time you appear in front of me with a smile, I have a strong desire to vomit. But you feel good about yourself and even think that you are very charming, enough to make most of the opposite sex secrete excessive hormones. You can read my thoughts. The female mayor's voice suddenly rose by at least an octave. Congratulations, you've guessed correctly. In fact, I've only awakened this ability not long ago, and I can't control it very well. But it's enough to deal with someone like you who has no mental protection. Luke grinned evilly. In that case, you've been lying to me all this time, treating me like a fool. Before the female mayor could finish her words, the boy standing at the side couldn't help but remind her, "Damn it! Hurry up and get rid of your trouble. I can already feel the shadow guards approaching us." "Don't worry, it won't take long." Luke shrugged nonchalantly and put on an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry. Although I still want to play with you for a while, time doesn't allow it. So goodbye, madam. I hope you won't suffer a mental breakdown in the process of dying." As the last word escaped his mouth, Luke instantly took a dozen steps back. The next second, boom! A twisted black tree rose from the ground and secreted a black-red mucus from its branches. The mucus enveloped all the Eniots, including the mayor. No matter how hard they struggled, it was to no avail. Chapter 1371. What an unbelievable scene! I didn't expect you to have some artistic cells. The boy raised his head and looked at the pitiful creatures that were struggling in the gum before slowly suffocating to death. His tone was full of admiration. This was because the pain and suffering these pitiful creatures suffered before their deaths had been perfectly preserved without missing a single word. Especially those ferocious and terrifying faces. No matter how brave a person was, they would probably have nightmares at night. Art. Luke smiled contemptuously. Please don't mention the word art in front of me. In my knowledge, the so-called art is actually a tool used to build barriers between classes. It is a barrier that the few who hold power and wealth deliberately set up to prevent the majority of the people at the bottom from easily getting close to them. Art itself is meaningless. It is only because people with ulterior motives think it has value that it is given value. What is real art? No one could give an accurate answer or definition. After all, everyone had different preferences and personalities. Naturally, there would be differences in their views on things. Things that were regarded as unattainable by some people might be complete garbage in the eyes of others. Therefore, all those priceless paintings, sculptures, architecture, poems, music, and so on, without exception, would go through a series of excessive flattery and hype, causing most people to believe that they were truly priceless treasures. As the saying goes, a lie told 1,000 times is the truth. When 80 to 90% of the people began to believe, priceless works of art would naturally be born. And those who were rich and in power would use these things to restrict the aesthetics of the people at the bottom, and even form a specialized profession or discipline to further widen the gap between classes. It must be known that those who had enough time and money to learn these useless things were definitely not the people at the bottom who had to face the pressure of living and even survival every day. Slowly, appreciation and taste of art became the patent of the upper class, and became a symbol of elegance and status. As for the people at the bottom who didn't know anything, other than looking at art with envy and worship, they could only listen to the explanations given by the so-called artists. Ha 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 ha. I like your bitter sarcasm. That's right. Art is a kind of visual or auditory self-hypnosis. In fact, when most people come into contact with art for the first time, they are essentially being forcibly instilled with another kind of ideology, or called brainwashing. Only those few things that could resonate with all intelligent life were worthy of being called true art. For example, the corpses hanging on the branches. It was believed that every spellcaster who had studied the topic of life and death in depth would be attracted to them. This is because the final boundary between life and death is perfectly preserved in this resin. The boy laughed out loud as he spoke his thoughts. Contempt for authority, contempt for tradition, contempt for life. He despised all the rules of the universe. There was no doubt that the similarities between the two were much higher than they thought. Just as the entire town was reduced to ruins and a large number of magical plants stopped growing, a dark force suddenly descended from the sky, completely enveloping the surroundings. In less than a minute, a few familiar figures appeared out of thin air. They were the shadow guards that he had saved not long ago. "I've finally caught you." The leader grinned with joy. In his eyes, the two boys were destined to become his bargaining chips in exchange for power with the Parliament. Unfortunately, there was no sign of panic on the faces of the two boys. Especially Luke, whose eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. He asked without turning his head, "What do you say? Should we retreat immediately, or should we give them a gift first?" "Up to you. But don't go overboard. Be careful of the force field's backlash," the boy reminded him nonchalantly. Since the town was still within the strong range of the Earth's nuclear force field, he was not very worried that the shadow guards would dare to make any big moves. "Since that's the case, let's start with the appetizer." As soon as he finished speaking, the magical plants that seemed to have fallen into a dormant state suddenly came to life again. However, this time, it was clearly different from the aimless attacks from before. Especially those gorgeous man-eating flowers. Not only did they open their mouths full of sharp teeth and bite wildly, but they also spat out gray seeds from their petals. Every time the seeds collided with a physical object, it would trigger a violent explosion and energy shock. One of the shadow guards was not paying attention and was almost blown to pieces by the thousands of seeds. He retreated a few hundred meters in a sorry state before barely escaping. "Bastard! How dare you!" Shocked and angry, the unlucky fellow quickly used the unknown black substance around him to repair his body. If it were not for the force field that prevented him from using large-scale killing methods, he would definitely teach this reckless brat a lesson. "Shut up! Don't embarrass the shadow guards!" The leader glared fiercely at the unlucky fellow. The latter did not even retort and immediately lowered his head. His eyes were filled with anger, unwillingness, and resentment. However, the leader clearly did not have the time to care about the psychological activities of his subordinate. He narrowed his eyes and sized up the two boys. After a full minute, he said tentatively, "Perhaps we can talk. What do you think?" "Talk? What do you want to talk about?" Luke asked curiously. "I believe you should know very well that we and our civilization do not have much malice toward the two of you. Instead of a meaningless chase and confrontation like this, why don't we work together? I guarantee with my own identity and reputation that the Parliament will not do anything excessive to the two of you, nor will we restrict your freedom." The leader of the Shadow Guards very sincerely offered reconciliation terms. This was because he did not have the confidence to bring the two boys back alive in this environment where their strength was greatly limited. Moreover, he had received bad news not long ago. The Parliament did not abide by the agreement and allowed a large-scale expeditionary army to invade this world in advance. If they could even go against the agreement that they had agreed on, it would not be a big deal to go against it again. Because of that item, the Shadow Guards would not be a match for the Parliament at all if a direct conflict broke out. That was why he hoped to have an external ally. Chapter 1372. Join Forces. A playful smile appeared on Luke's face. He turned his head and looked at his brother. This was because he felt that the reason why the other party proposed such a condition was most likely because he didn't know that the fellow who also belonged to the Shadow Guards had already been dismembered and studied several times from the inside out. Right now, he was imprisoned in a sealed container. That's right. I believe you should know that the main power of the Dalant civilization is concentrated in the hands of the Parliament. This situation has been going on for thousands of years, and it has even become a kind of traditional convention. But in fact, earlier on, there were two sets of parallel power systems. The Parliament was only a subsidiary organization responsible for managing the lower-class people, and we are the ones who truly control the power. When he said these words, the Shadow Guard leader's face showed strong unwillingness and resentment. Especially his two eyes, which were empty and lifeless, as if he had fallen into the ancient memories of the past. So, you want to use the two of us to return to the center of power, or at least the periphery of the center of power, and try to make a comeback? The boy took the initiative to stand out and take over the topic. He could feel the burning desire in the other party's heart. This was definitely not a trap or a deceitful tactic, but a strong dissatisfaction with the Parliament. Although he didn't understand what differences, contradictions, or problems left behind by the history of the Dalant people, it didn't stop him from using this to achieve his own unspeakable goals. The leader of the Shadow Guards nodded. That's right. Maybe you don't know, but the people in the Parliament have secretly established a research center, and they are trying to figure out the secret of the dark blue liquid in the crystal day and night. As far as I know, they have successfully weaponized it and intend to use it against the two of you. Weaponized. When Luke heard this word, his pupils suddenly shrank, and he subconsciously tightened his grip on the silver pendant hanging on his neck. The boy undoubtedly noticed this subtle action, and a trace of desire and greed flashed in his eyes. He then continued to ask, why? Why did you choose to betray your own race and cooperate with us? The reason is simple. I believe that you have read the history of the Dalant people and understand that there is a watershed in the course of our history. Before that was the era of theocracy, and after that was the era of magic. Unfortunately, the Shadow Guards are a product left over from the era of theocracy. Although we have great power, from the moment we were born, we were destined to only be able to curl up in a dark corner and silently protect the entire civilization. No matter how many sacrifices we make, no matter how many threats we eliminate, we can't obtain power, wealth, and glory. Remember, this situation didn't last a day or two, or a year or two, but thousands of years. If it were you, what would you do? The leader of the Shadow Guards asked meaningfully. As the saying goes, time was the most cruel and ruthless thing in the world. It could make the noble people to become despicable, and it could make the benevolent people become cruel. Nothing, especially the complex. Perhaps the earliest members of the Shadow Guards were indeed willing to sacrifice themselves to silently guard a civilization that had been scarred by war. But with the rapid development of the Dalant people's knowledge, technology, and power, those who joined later were no longer willing, but forced. Coupled with the long period of isolation, it was inevitable that their hearts would become more and more twisted, angrier, and more unreconciled. Until now, both sides were like fire and water. Although they still maintained cooperation on the surface, they were only a step away from becoming enemies. I see. I think I understand. The boy's face showed a thoughtful expression. But I still have a question. Since you have such great power, why don't you just start a coup and fight for your own rights? Ha 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 ha. That's a good question. It's not that we don't want to start a coup, but the Council has a powerful magical item, and this magical item is our natural enemy. Even if we just get close to it, every member of the Shadow Guards will lose all their power and become lambs at the mercy of others. The leader laughed and gave the answer. So the real purpose of your cooperation with us is to seize or destroy this magical item. Luke seemed to understand the real purpose of their cooperation. He rubbed his chin and exchanged glances with his brother. But unfortunately, the latter shook his head without batting an eyelid and rejected his silent proposal. The leader of the Shadow Guards noticed the exchange between the two and immediately exposed them with a sneer. "Don't waste your energy. If you want to seize that magical item to control us, it's absolutely wishful thinking. Let's not talk about how to use this magical item that only the council members of each generation know. Just the restriction that only the Dalent people can activate it is enough to make you give up on your unrealistic fantasies." "Oh? If that's the case, then what's in it for us to cooperate with you? Why would we risk our lives to return to the Dalent people's control?" Luke questioned bluntly. "Isn't it enough to help you get rid of the endless pursuit?" Another member of the Shadow Guards retorted. "Not enough. Of course it's not enough. This universe is so vast and boundless. There are civilizations more powerful than the Dalent people, so it's not too difficult to get rid of you." The boy began to bargain expressionlessly. Although he had already made up his mind to go back and take back what belonged to him no matter what. "Then what do you want?" The leader of the Shadow Guards cautiously probed. "It's very simple. I want you to help me decipher the secret recorded on the stone pillar. All of it. Not a single bit of concealment." The boy stated his conditions without hesitation. But before the leader could give a reply of agreement or refusal, the shortest member of the Shadow Guards couldn't help but jump out and scold. "Dream on. That's a taboo of the Dalent people. Not to mention you, even the council members don't have the right to know the contents recorded on it." "Taboo? What I'm most interested in is taboo. Either you give me what I want and I'll help you destroy that magical item, or you become my enemy and continue this endless pursuit. Believe me, it won't be long before you find out who's the hunter and who's the hunted. Don't forget, we're still young and have unlimited room for improvement." Chapter 1373. Leader. You can't promise them. As you know, only the Shadow Guards have the right to read and keep the contents on the origin stone pillar. Apart from that, anyone who tries to decipher it, no matter who they are, will become our mortal enemy. "Shut up. You have no right to tell the leader what to do." "What do you mean? Could it be that you want to go back on your oath?" "No. I'm just tired of these endless responsibilities and obligations." "That's right. It's time to change. This time, we're doing it for ourselves so that we won't be enslaved anymore." There was no doubt that for the people of Dalent, the stone pillar in the center of the dark lake had a supreme status. That was why when the boy mentioned it, it immediately triggered a fierce dispute within the Shadow Guards. On one hand, it was a heavy responsibility to follow thousands of years of tradition. On the other hand, it was related to everyone's vital interests. Often, it was at this time that the ugliness in human nature could be seen. In just a few minutes, they were divided into two different factions. They stared at each other with swords drawn, as if a battle of life and death would start in the next second. Luke saw this scene and couldn't help but curl his lips slightly. He said to the brother beside him through sign language, "Well done." "No. This wasn't done by me. They have always had problems internally. What I've done has only magnified these differences." The boy also used sign language to reply. Just as the two were secretly communicating in private, the leader of the Shadow Guards finally couldn't help but scold loudly. "Enough! What do you want to do? Do you want to kill each other and let the bastards in the council laugh at you?" "But, no buts. Remember your identity and position." The leader glared fiercely at the subordinate who tried to continue arguing, turned around, took a deep breath and said, "I can satisfy your request. But the premise is that you must let me see the magic item first, then I will tell you how to decipher those symbols." The boy nodded gently. "Okay. Very fair. Now you can tell me your plan." "My plan is very simple. As the two of you continue to flee, it would be best for you to help the inhabitants of this planet build a powerful resistance force. then seize the opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the expeditionary force controlled by the Council. In this way, we can develop our forces in secret and revive the power flowing in the Dalent bloodline. By the time the Parliament found out, it was already too late to turn the situation around. At that time, we will cooperate with each other to put on a show and let the Shadow Guards successfully capture the two of you. The leader's plan was not complicated. It could even be said that it was very simple and old-fashioned. But what was interesting was that combined with the current complex environment, it could indeed achieve a very perfect effect. In this process, be it the expeditionary army made up of ordinary Dalent soldiers or the resistance army made up of Eniots, all of them would become cannon fodder and be discarded after being used up. Political struggles, in particular, were often darker, uglier, dirtier, and more unscrupulous than most people imagined. As long as they could win, the methods and sacrifices were never important. In any case, the winner could unscrupulously beautify themselves and vilify their enemies. After a few generations, who would still remember the true faces of those losers? At the same time, far away in the Dalent Expeditionary Army camp, the Parliament members were working hard according to the plan, expanding along the underground tunnels that extended in all directions. Every time they advanced and occupied an area, they would place a large number of devices to resist the nuclear force field regardless of the cost. Only in this way could they ensure that their powerful spellcasting abilities would not be restrained and there would not be a strong backlash. But the Eniots were no fools. When they found out that there was a problem with the devices, they immediately launched an intense retaliation. Relying on their innate digging ability, they easily dug out a narrow tunnel in a corner that the Dalent did not notice. Then, they rushed out and destroyed the magical devices without caring about casualties. Then, they used their advantage in numbers to fight the enemy who had lost the support of magic. Not long after, the rapid expansion of the Durantians came to a halt. Instead, it was replaced by endless harassment and assault. There were no large-scale confrontations. Not to mention, there weren't any spectacular large-scale spells. There were only small groups of a dozen to a few dozen people fighting each other. Under such conditions, the Dalent's greatest advantage could not be used at all, and the casualties were rising steadily. Especially after losing their spellcasting abilities, the death of the spellcasters was enough to make the Parliament's higher-ups furious. There were a few times when they wanted to use some ultimate weapons to directly destroy the planet's core. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse, and they did not approve those crazy proposals. The reason was simple. They came from afar not to destroy a planet that was once abandoned, but to bring the two boys back alive. For this, it was worth it even if they had to pay a huge price. Looking at the tragic scene transmitted by the three-dimensional magic projection, the speaker crossed his hands and held his chin, asking with a hoarse voice, "Since the beginning of the war, how many warriors and spellcasters have we lost?" "At least 50,000 warriors and 2,000 spellcasters. Apart from that, the magical devices we have on hand to resist the geocentric force field have also been largely destroyed. Our current inventory is insufficient to complete the suppression of the entire planet." A commander of the expeditionary force wearing the Medal of Honor quickly gave a series of numbers. It could be seen that this commander was not in a good mood at the moment. His eyes were flashing with anger. It should be known that the Medal of Honor was only awarded to the highest commanders of the expeditionary army who had won glorious victories. It symbolized the highest honor. Those who wore this medal were, without exception, the elites of the elite. They had participated in at least a dozen evenly matched wars. But now, such a commander was frowning. He could not think of any way to deal with the enemies who were constantly digging holes and launching surprise attacks. Because no matter what he did, the enemy would first destroy the magical devices that suppressed the magical devices, causing the spellcasters to lose their combat ability first. unless they first retracted their forces and restored their absolute advantage in military strength in a certain area. Chapter 1374. Hesitation. Contradiction. As the highest authority of the Dalant civilization, the Parliament was caught in a dilemma. The huge expeditionary army that was supposed to be invincible had once again encountered an unprecedented setback in this world. Not only had they suffered heavy losses before they could achieve their strategic goals, but the anti-nuclear force field device that they had high hopes for did not play a decisive role either. Especially as the Eniots entered a state of war, the birth rate and growth rate of newborns would rapidly increase within a few months and eventually reach a terrifying number. Coupled with this kind of small-scale battle that completely disregarded their own casualties, it wouldn't take long for the expeditionary forces' morale to reach the brink of collapse. After all, the Dalant people were also a kind of intelligent life, and they would also develop a state of despair and fear. No matter how the so-called absolute rationality was emphasized, it couldn't cover up this point. "Tell me, Commander, our plan has failed, right?" The speaker was silent for a long time before suddenly asking without warning. The man wearing the Medal of Glory nodded without hesitation. "That's right. Your Excellency. Our plan number 1 has failed. This world's reaction is much faster than we imagined. From the beginning of the invasion until now, they only launched a full-scale war mobilization in such a short time. I kind of understand why my old friend chose to leave in disappointment back then. Fighting in such an unfavorable environment, even if our civilization is a few levels higher than the opponent, it's difficult to reverse the situation." "What about the superweapons? If we use the superweapons, how much do you think we can increase our chances of winning?" The speaker narrowed his eyes and continued to ask. Obviously, he was unwilling to swallow the bitter fruit of failure. To be precise, he didn't allow a record of failure during his term of office. Otherwise, those political opponents who remained silent might collectively attack and oust him from the speaker's position. "Sorry, please forgive me for being blunt. Based on the current situation, the superweapons we can use aren't many, and it's not enough to completely reverse the situation. It might even cause the enemy to retaliate. You should know best that we don't know much about this world, and we don't know what secrets are hidden in the deepest core of the planet." The expeditionary force commander straightforwardly gave his opinion. Having experienced hundreds of battles, he understood that he was now caught in a tug-of-war called quagmire. Either he poured more resources to wear down the enemy, or he chose to retreat while he still had the initiative in his hands to reduce unnecessary losses. From the perspective of pure war, there was nothing wrong with his judgment. Unfortunately, war was never pure. It was a continuation of politics. Take the general mobilization that was rare even in the history of the Dalant civilization, for example. In fact, the current ruling class was unwilling to admit the mistakes they had made, let alone hand over the power in their hand. That was why they started this war. No matter the cost, they had to bring the 2 boys back alive. Therefore, before experiencing a crushing defeat, the Parliament would never give up on their original plan, nor would they willingly admit defeat to their political opponents and step down from the stage of history. The speaker knew very well that there was nothing wrong with the other party's suggestion, but he still tried to communicate with those who supported him out of the corner of his eye. At the same time, he didn't forget to observe those who opposed him. After a few minutes, he ordered in an emotionless tone, "In the name of the Parliament, I authorize you to use the super weapon, resonance." What? Using resonance in the underground world? Are you crazy? Another Parliament member stood up abruptly. His tone was full of anger and dissatisfaction. "Of course I'm not crazy. Instead, I made a decisive judgment based on the current unfavorable situation. As everyone knows, one of our current predicaments is the endless harassment of the enemy and their innate ability to dig holes. Once we use resonance, most of the tunnels in this underground world will collapse. It can cause great damage to the active enemies, their towns, and villages. Most importantly, resonance will only affect the geological structure and won't harm the core. At this stage, this is the only superweapon we can use. The speaker gently knocked on the table and explained. However, the opposing parliament member was obviously not satisfied with this explanation. He immediately retorted, "But the problem is that resonance is an indiscriminate attack. This means that the places we control will also collapse. Especially the tentacles that we have extended with great difficulty, they will all be destroyed under the attack of resonance. Other than that, resonance will also cause the entire underground world to be isolated. It will probably take dozens or even hundreds of years to open it up again. Don't you think that it's worth it to be able to integrate the bloodlines of 2 higher life forms into the entire race in just over 100 years? The chairman asked in a meaningful manner. But the problem is that you can't guarantee that this plan will succeed. And you've already failed once. The parliament member stood his ground, unwilling to be outdone. He was not the only one. Many people also showed an expression of agreement. After all, the Dalent civilization was not a centralized empire. Instead, it was an elite group that held the ruling power. Generally speaking, to be able to become the Speaker of the Parliament meant that this person was the most capable and powerful person in the entire civilization. However, once he made a mistake and began to be questioned by other elites, it meant that it was time for him to hand over the highest authority. The speaker clearly felt the threat contained in those eyes. He responded calmly, "Whether it's a failure or not, we can only judge after the final result is out. Please be patient. I'll give you a satisfactory answer." Having said that, he ignored everyone's reaction and loudly ordered again, "Go! Convey the Parliament's authorization. Activate resonance of the super weapon in an hour." "As you wish, Your Excellency." The commander bowed and began to convey the order without saying anything else. Soon, the frontline troops that were constantly fighting the enemy, injured and killed, received the notice. They quickly abandoned their positions and retreated to a relatively safe place. At the same time, the spellcasters worked hard to reinforce the space around the portal and the main areas around it to ensure that it could withstand the structural damage caused by resonance. At the very least, it would not collapse on the spot and bury everyone alive. When everything was ready, a magic device made up of thousands of rings was carefully taken out from the sealed alley and placed in an open space that was heavily guarded. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1375. This is the superweapon, resonance? A young male spellcaster stretched out a finger, attempting to touch the thousands of golden rings of various sizes. But before he could touch them, he was interrupted by an elderly man beside him, who scolded him fiercely. "Idiot! Watch your hand, or I don't mind cutting them all down." Resonance is one of the pinnacle masterpieces of the entire civilization. Any touch could lead to serious consequences. If you don't want to die, and if you don't want to kill the people around you, you better behave yourself. "I'm sorry, teacher. I just couldn't help myself." The young man quickly lowered his head and admitted his mistake. However, the old man's attention was clearly not on the apprentice. He spoke directly to the commander who was close by. "Please show me the authorization from the council." "Of course. Here." The commander who wore the Medal of Honor handed over a black slate. The old man took it and cast a few detection spells to confirm that it was not forged or an order signed involuntarily. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. "That's right. The authorization is valid. Please give the order. In the name of the highest military commander of the expeditionary force, I hereby declare the use of the superweapon resonance in battle. Please begin." The council is still waiting for the result. Having said that, the commander quickly retreated to a safe zone, widening his eyes as he prepared to admire the magnificent scene of the superweapon unleashing its power. There was no superfluous words. After the old man received the order, he immediately got busy with his apprentices. It did not take long for them to complete the simple debugging. Finally, he gently tossed a dazzling pearl into the middle of the ring. In the next second, buzz, the ring that was originally still began to spin around the pearl at high speed, at the same time constantly emitting waves of invisible vibrations. Anything that came into contact with these waves, no matter what it was, would begin to resonate uncontrollably. It would be reduced to a pile of dust in 2 to 3 seconds or at most a minute. What was more terrifying was that these waves had incredible penetrative power. Other than specific magical defenses, even the toughest crust and metal ores would not be spared. From the start to the end, it had only been about half an hour, and almost 70% of the entire underground world had collapsed. Almost all the towns and villages were drowned by the falling soil and meteors. Only a few lucky ones managed to escape. Resonance, as the name suggested, was to use the power of magic to make everything that the ripples touched resonate with, ultimately destroying the originally indestructible structure from the inside. When this superweapon was first designed, it was used to attack fortified fortresses with a lot of magical defenses. It was not like other superweapons, which were used to directly cause damage to the enemy. However, on planet Ankas, it produced an effect more terrifying than most superweapons. Even the areas around the Expeditionary Army's camp that weren't particularly tightly reinforced had turned into ruins. Many alchemy puppets were digging and cleaning, trying to open up a tunnel that was submerged in mud and stones. Just as Dalent's men began to clean up the mess, the boy, who was shaking off the thick layer of mud on his body, could not help but complain, "Damn it! Had the old fogies of the Dalent Council gone mad? To actually use such a dangerous superweapon like resonance in the underworld." "Resonance? What's that?" Luke fiercely spat out the mud in his mouth and asked with great interest. "As you wish, resonance is to make non-living things resonate and then disintegrate them into tiny particles. At the very least, it can destroy the internal structure of some sturdy objects. It seems that the Council is serious this time. They won't rest until they capture you and me. Also, do you feel it? They've sealed off the space of this planet. We can no longer escape through teleportation." The boy took a deep breath and replied. Luke nodded thoughtfully. "I see. They've used this method to destroy the fierce resistance of the natives. At least we don't have to worry about endless harassment for a short period of time." "Yes, but they've also cut off transportation. In such a completely sealed environment, it's advantageous for us." With that, the boy drilled out of the ground and began to take a look at the surroundings. Ever since they separated from the Shadow Guards, the two had been heading towards the depths of the planet's core. According to the information obtained from the female mayor, there was an incomparably sacred city in the depths of the planet's core. Its name was Pulla, and it was the original city of this world. It was also the Holy Land in the hearts of the Eniot. That was because only in this city could they see true light and endless power. Of course, the two boys didn't believe in this mysterious and religious description at all. In their eyes, the so-called true light and endless power was likely to be the scorching core of the planet, as well as the powerful force field generated by the core. But regarding this guess, they needed to see it with their own eyes to confirm it. Looking at the completely blocked tunnel, Luke asked with an uncertain tone, "What should we do now? Please don't tell me we have to dig all the way in." "No. Of course not. Remember the symbols we deciphered before? It's time to put them to use now." As soon as his voice fell, the boy immediately combined the 3 symbols together and threw it down to the layer of soil below his waist. In an instant, an invisible force soared into the air and quickly gathered the soil into a ball, continuously kneading and squeezing. In the end, a gigantic humanoid clay man was born out of thin air. But apparently, it wasn't under anyone's control. Like an idiot, it bounced around on the spot several times before opening its mouth and devouring the layer of soil on the ground. Slowly, a tunnel leading to the lower layer was opened up. But the clay man was unaware of this. It was still driven by its instincts to devour and strengthen itself. Looking at this strange scene, Luke rubbed his chin and muttered to himself. This is creation? No, it's not creation. At least, it's not a complete creation. You guessed it right. Remember those strange life forms that killed and devoured each other in the dark lake? According to my deduction, they were born under the influence of the symbols on the stone pillars. And now I'm using a part of it. Anyway, the life and death of this world has nothing to do with you and me. It doesn't matter even if this creation eventually devours the entire planet. Chapter 1376. The newly born clay life form was like a gluttonous snake that never tired, constantly devouring the stones and soil that fell from above, and it didn't take long for it to open up a tunnel that extended in all directions. Especially the deepest part near the core, it was rare that it didn't collapse, and the walls seemed to have been burned by some kind of high-temperature flame or magma, showing a colorful smooth surface that felt like metal and glass. Even if a hard weapon was used to hit it, it wouldn't leave a single trace. Obviously, with the clay life form's current strength, it was not enough to destroy such a solid body, so it quickly turned around and continued to move in another direction. Because it didn't have consciousness, it didn't have the ability to think. It completely relied on the most basic instinct of life to act, devouring all materials that could strengthen itself. Watching this monster, that would evolve into who knows what in the future, the boy breathed a sigh of relief and said with a slightly excited tone, "Let's go, it's time to see the city built in the depths of the Earth's core, the legendary Holy City, Pulla. You have the final say." Luke shrugged indifferently. According to the agreement reached with the Shadow Guards, they needed to go to Pulla and cooperate with the higher-ups of the Enyat to continue to block the Dalent's expeditionary force and ensure that they suffered heavy losses in the process of expansion and suppression. Only in this way could the Shadow Guards have the opportunity to turn the tide. The fierce internal political struggle had always been a life-and-death struggle. There was no reason and rules to speak of. What's more, the two boys were just outsiders after all. They could never be recognized by the main body of the civilization, let alone hold the highest power. From a certain perspective, they were actually the least threatening and the most ideal partners. In the beginning, the Council also intended to use a conciliatory policy, through brainwashing and instilling the ideas of the Dalent, let the boy think that he was a member of this race. But unfortunately, they underestimated the ambition and desire in the boy's heart. As a reincarnator who would occasionally awaken certain memories, knowledge, and ways of thinking from the depths of his soul, it was impossible for the boy to become anyone's slave, puppet, or captive pet. Right now, the only thing he wanted to do was to destroy the Dalent civilization and send this race that tried to control him into the trash heap of history. They continued to walk along the colorful tunnel. After about 7 or 8 days of walking, the temperature of the environment began to rise abruptly. Waves of heat waves hit them in the face, and every step they took was extremely strenuous. What was even more frightening was that as the temperature of the environment increased, the strength of the force field became more and more astonishing. Even controlling the energy to maintain one's body temperature became extremely dangerous. There were a few times when Luke, who was relatively weaker, almost lost control and blew himself up. Fortunately, he reacted quickly enough and cut off the energy supply in time, which allowed him to escape the disaster. However, from then on, he no longer dared to make use of the convenience of magic. Instead, he obediently walked the last part of the journey on foot. When they saw the dazzling light in front of them, the two boys couldn't help but widen their eyes in surprise. At the end of the originally gloomy underground tunnel, a huge object that was emitting light and heat like a fireball suddenly appeared in their line of sight. This was not a star, but the liquid core of a planet. Its size was so huge, and coupled with the fact that it was very close, it was even more dazzling than the stars on most planets. especially the hot liquid substance that was constantly flowing on the surface. Every time it surged, there would be a shockingly hot airflow. The heat waves in the tunnel were transmitted from this place. However, for some unknown reason, this liquid core did not lose pressure because it was exposed to the outside. Instead, it gradually began to cool down and finally changed from liquid to solid. On the contrary, its current state was like a star, constantly providing the necessary radiation and energy for this underground world. Below the hot core there was a dark city. It was so quiet that it was like a dead city. There were no signs of life at all. "This is the holy city of Pola?" the boy muttered to himself in an uncertain tone. "No matter if it is or not, we have to go and take a look, right?" Luke, on the other hand, did not think too much. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and strode towards the direction of the entrance. For him who had lived in a desert with an environmental temperature of more than 50 degrees Celsius for a long time, the heat waves emitted by the core had not yet exceeded his tolerance limit. However, he understood that even if he was in such an environment, he would not be able to hold on for long. He had to figure out the truth as soon as possible and then decide whether to stay or leave. In contrast, the boy who grew up like a prince was obviously a little out of breath. Coupled with the fact that he could not use magic to lower his body temperature, his face was very pale. There were even faint signs of dehydration. After about 10 minutes, when the two of them approached the entrance, they suddenly realized that their bodies seemed to have passed through a layer of invisible barrier. In an instant, the originally hot and dry air suddenly became cool and refreshing. Moreover, the city that looked dead from the outside had now become alive. After realizing this, the two of them very tacitly exchanged a look. Without asking, they knew that the outside of the city must be covered with a layer of enchantment or something like magic protection. What was more interesting was that there were almost no male members in this city. At a glance, all of them were pregnant women with big bellies. Many of them who were about to give birth began to lay eggs on the streets under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes. At a glance, it was like a huge city of fertility. Damn it! I think I know why these natives call this the Holy City. The primitive worship of reproduction. Only in such an environment, their descendants can absorb enough energy in a short period of time and grow at an extraordinary speed. The core is their nourishment. At least before the core starts to cool down and deteriorate, they don't have to worry about the extinction of the entire race. Luke licked his lips and praised. "You're right. From the perspective of survival, the Eniots are more successful than the Dalant. I'm starting to look forward to meeting their higher-ups to discuss the specifics of the cooperation." As soon as his voice faded, the boy turned his gaze towards a small group of female guards who were quickly approaching them. The guards had obviously noticed that two outsiders who did not belong to their race had intruded and surrounded them in the blink of an eye. Chapter 1377. Outsider. Who are you? Why are you approaching the holy city? The female leader raised the spear in her hand and asked loudly. From her vigilant eyes and extremely nasty attitude, Luke had no doubt that if he did not cooperate, the other party would immediately launch a fatal attack. Furthermore, the spear emitting a shocking amount of energy was definitely not a simple cold weapon, but a powerful magical device. Even though he did not understand how such a thing could be used normally in an environment surrounded by a powerful geocentric force field, he did not want to try it at all. Without any hesitation, the boy directly raised both his hands and replied in fluent local language, "Please don't misunderstand, we have no hostility, we just want to talk to your supreme ruler about the invaders." "Invaders?" The other female on the side subconsciously shook the antennae on her forehead. "That's right. The invaders who are attacking you are called the Dalant, a powerful magical civilization that has conquered countless worlds. I know many of their secrets, including the super weapon that caused the collapse of the underground world, resonance." In order to arouse the other party's interest, the boy threw out a bait without hesitation. He clearly knew that the large-scale collapse a few months ago would cause a shocking amount of damage to the civilization living in the underground world. Disregarding everything else, just the fact that the women in this city were forcefully giving birth by overdrawing their life force was the best proof. According to the records of the Dalent, only when the population of the tribe was greatly reduced, Enyet would start to give birth without restraint. Why do you know all this? What is your relationship with the invaders? The female leader obviously did not believe an outsider so easily and continued to interrogate. The well-prepared boy calmly pointed at himself and Luke beside him, and explained with a slightly helpless tone, "As you wish, my brother and I are irreconcilable enemies with the Dalent. In order to destroy this group of greedy and shameless raiders, we constantly traverse through various worlds, looking for allies, planning to unite all the forces that can be united, and make these bastards pay for their actions." "So now you are looking for us?" The female leader narrowed her eyes, slightly restraining the strong hostility from before. "That's right." The boy nodded with a serious face. "As far as I know, you are the only race in the known world that has successfully repelled the Dalent invasion and successfully defended your homeland. Take a look, this is what the world looked like after it was occupied by the Dalent. Believe me, you would never want your home to become like that." After saying that, he took out a magic item that he had made a long time ago and activated the image data stored in it. In the next second, one by one, the worlds that had been plundered by the Dalent's people had gradually become desolate, or even completely destroyed, were all displayed without leaving a single trace behind. In less than 5 minutes, the expressions on the female guards' faces changed from initial shock to fear, and then from fear to despair. Without personally witnessing the full firepower of Dalent's expeditionary army, one would never be able to imagine that kind of earth-shattering magic and the magnificent scene of a large number of metal golems charging head-on. It was only at this moment that Enyet realized how lucky they were to be able to hold their own against the ferocious invaders. That was right. This was luck. If it weren't for the favorable environment of the underground world and the powerful force field constantly produced by the Earth's core, they wouldn't even have been able to withstand the first wave of attacks. They would have become the target of the invaders' wanton plundering and trampling, just like the other worlds. "Follow me." After persevering for more than half an hour to watch the image data, the female leader finally gave up the last trace of hostility. She snatched the magic item that was playing the image data and brought the two boys to the semicircular building in the center of the city. Along the way, the group passed through at least 10 levels of checkpoints and interrogations before finally handing over all their belongings under layers of surveillance and arriving at an empty hall. In the center of the hall there was a mysterious device that looked like a glass jar. Inside it was a huge, indescribable, fat life form that was soaked in it. To be precise, its upper body had the appearance of an Enyet, while its lower body had a large, oval abdomen like a bug. Through the white translucent skin, one could clearly see that the abdomen that was more than 100 meters long was densely packed with eggs that were in the process of being incubated. Luke's pupils suddenly contracted when he saw this scene. His entire body was instantly drenched in sweat. This was because he could clearly sense that there was an incomparably powerful soul hidden within the body of this ugly creature. Even the mental strength that it unconsciously released could pose a great threat to him. "Great Ancestor, Mother of all Enyots, Supreme Queen Your Majesty, I've brought you two outsiders. They have important information about the invaders." The female leader knelt on one knee and bowed with utmost sincerity. "Ah, my child, I feel the fear, despair, and anxiety in your heart. Tell me, what kind of information did these two people bring?" The mysterious life form with a series of astonishing titles finally opened her eyes slowly. Her tone was filled with peace and kindness. "Please take a look. This is the information they brought. The enemy is much stronger than we expected." With that, the woman presented the magical device with both hands. However, the mysterious life form didn't activate the magical device like the boy did. Instead, she held it up to her forehead. In less than a second, she looked up with a pair of breathtaking eyes and asked, "Did you collect all of this?" "No, Your Majesty. Only a small portion of these were taken on the spot. The rest are either memories of others or information that we snatched from the Dalence people. I can assure you that none of the information is exaggerated or false." The boy bowed slightly to show his respect. "Is that so?" The mysterious life form pursed her lips and revealed a meaningful smile. "But I keep feeling that you're deliberately hiding something. Everyone has their own privacy. But I can swear that I won't hesitate to destroy the Dalence people," the boy carefully guaranteed. Chapter 1378. Ah, secret. How long has it been since I heard that word? The mysterious creature shot a glance at the servants who served her day and night. The latter immediately swarmed forward and carefully flipped her huge lower body to a more comfortable position. Her eyes were so deep and wise that they seemed to be able to dig out the deepest secrets hidden in one's heart. But unfortunately, this kind of shallow mental infiltration didn't have much effect on the strong-willed boy. She maintained a calm expression and replied, "Perhaps to you, who controls an entire race, secret is indeed a foreign and distant word. But to us, who are relatively independent and intelligent beings, secrets are an indispensable part of our daily lives. It is a reference used to differentiate one another and also the embodiment of our self-awareness." Without a doubt, this mysterious creature with terrifying reproductive abilities was the supreme ruler of the Anat people. It was her who created the entire underground world's ancient traditions and civilization from scratch. As for whether she was the true ancestor of this race, it was still uncertain for now. However, as a higher life form through and through, the power she possessed still surpassed that of the most powerful beings of the Darantion race. As long as she was willing, she could even mobilize the power of the Earth's core to launch indiscriminate and destructive attacks on her enemies. Independent. The mysterious queen repeated the word, her face showing a mixture of contempt and disdain. Independence means that one will place one's own interests above the intelligence of the race. It means that one will constantly fight for resources, authority, and status. It means that one will not be able to control the situation at the fastest speed at crucial moments. In my impression, independence is a word filled with negativity. I once tried to let my children think independently, but guess what happened in the end? Could it be that they're working together to get rid of you? Luke probed with interest. The queen nodded without hesitation. You guessed it right. After obtaining sufficient freedom, they seemed to have gone mad. Their selfishness in their subconscious mind was magnified infinitely. In the end, they even wanted to kill me, the source of their spirit and bloodline, so as to obtain true independence in the truest sense. That's why I hate independent thinking. Only by maintaining a sense of community can the entire race develop healthily. That's why you hate secrets as well. That's because secrets often mean distrust, and it means that an individual will erode the group. Luke bluntly said what the other party wanted to say. Any monster who was used to controlling everything around them, even the thoughts of intelligent life, would not allow anyone to keep a secret in front of them. Perhaps this secret was even related to the enemy they were fighting. Now, there were only two choices before the two boys. He could either hand over the secret and gain the other party's trust, or they could choose to leave, abandon the original plan of alliance, and come up with a new plan. All of you are very smart, perhaps even smarter than all of my children put together. I finally understand why those invaders would expend such an astonishing amount of manpower and resources to chase all the way to this world to capture all of you. Along with the Queen's slightly teasing tone, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. In particular, the servants who were in charge of serving her seemed to have entered a state of battle, surrounding the two of them from the inside out. You know where we came from? The boy's pupils suddenly contracted. Of course. Ever since you arrived at that small town, I've been observing you in secret. Even though there are many outsiders who come to the underground world, I have an impression of most of them and can distinguish their races. But you are different. Regardless of your actions, mannerisms, and maturity and cunning beyond your age, all of it proves that you belong to a higher level of life. The Queen had no intention of hiding anything and confidently told him everything she knew. Perhaps in her opinion, the two interesting boys in front of her were firmly under her control, and it was impossible for them to play any tricks. Oh, damn it! What do you think we should do now? Luke purposely pretended to be nervous as he asked his brother. What else can we do? It's not like we haven't experienced something like this before. The boy smiled and shrugged. Just as he finished speaking, a second ago, he still had a smile on his face, but now, he quickly took out a silver object from his pocket and threw it at the female servants who were filled with hostility. Instantly, a blinding white light illuminated the entire hall. There was no sound. There were no tremors or explosions. However, the hundreds of fully armed female servants were melted into a puddle of gray powder in the white light. No one could escape this calamity. When the heavy guards at the door reacted and tried to rush in to kill the intruders and protect their queen, Luke was already standing beside the queen. He put a collar that was flashing with red light on the target's slender neck and warned with a smile, "Stop, don't come any closer, or else I guarantee that your queen will become a burning torch in less than a second." "Bastard! You! How dare you!" The female leader was obviously mad, and even her voice was trembling slightly. "Retreat! They are serious." The queen seemed to have noticed something and immediately spoke to stop the situation from worsening. Even though she had great strength, her body was still relatively weak. Otherwise, she wouldn't have hidden her entire life in this special city surrounded by a powerful force field. Looking at the female guards who were filled with indignation, anger, and shame slowly retreating, the boy stroked his chin and said to the captive queen, "Your Majesty, we should be able to have a good talk now, shouldn't we? Do you think I will compromise? If you dare to harm a single hair on my body, I guarantee that neither of you will be able to walk out of this hall." The queen raised her chin and put on a haughty attitude. "Empty threats are the best way to hide the nervousness in your heart. Please don't scare us. We are not easily frightened. Moreover, we don't want to hurt you. We just want to cooperate with you to fight against those intruders. I guarantee that as long as you do as we ask, you will regain your freedom unharmed." When he said this, the boy's tone revealed a commanding tone that could not be refused. Chapter 1379. How to completely control a highly organized and coordinated race. The answer was simple. That was to seize and control their brains. There was no doubt that the queen was the brain of the Enyat people, the only one they obeyed 100%. Moreover, from the simple conversation, Luke could already confirm that this life form that was similar to the queen insect had secretly constructed a huge spiritual network to connect every descendant. As long as she was willing, she could read the contents of the other party's memories at any time. She could even invade the consciousness and use the target's eyes, body, and various organs to do some unspeakable things. It was precisely because of this that Luke decided to take the risk and try to seize the queen, using her life as a threat to force her to serve his plan. Because according to the various knowledge and thoughts in his brain, the higher one stood in power, the more they feared death. In order to escape death, they would often do some despicable things, including betraying the interests of the entire race. Obviously, Luke made the right bet. After a series of probing and threats, the queen finally chose to compromise. Through the mental network, she ordered the surviving descendants to enter a state of total war. In less than half a year, the Enyats, who had lost more than 60% of their population, relied on crazy reproduction and rapid growth to restore their population to its previous level. And these newborns didn't obediently hide. Instead, after simple training, they once again launched an attack at the invaders' base. The suppression force field that Dalen's people built with great difficulty with advanced technology was once again destroyed. They didn't even have time to react before they were drowned by the roaring enemies. Shock. Unconcealable shock. Including the chairman, several higher-ups widened their eyes as they watched the newly built strongholds being destroyed and disintegrated. The massive plan that had just begun was mysteriously destroyed. Even in their dreams, they couldn't figure out how these backward races living in the underground world could grasp their movements in such a short time and even dare to initiate an attack. Weren't they afraid of another resonance? With a series of doubts and puzzlement, the Expeditionary Army's second emergency meeting was held in the camp. The chairman with a gloomy expression directly skipped the opening pleasantries and shouted at a shapeshifter leader, "Tell me, what's going on? Why did our enemy react so quickly? Didn't you say a while ago that they were retreating deeper underground?" "Sorry, sir, we did our best. Please take a look, this is the list of shapeshifters killed in the recent period. The enemy seems to be able to distinguish who is real and who is in disguise through a certain method." The shapeshifter leader bitterly smiled as he placed a blank slate on the table. After a short period of reading, everyone who saw it had undisguised surprise on their faces. As the strongest infiltration tool, shapeshifters had always been the trump card of the Expeditionary Army to gather intelligence and set off a bloody storm within the enemy. But this time, they had lost more than half of their forces as soon as they made their move. Most of them were discovered as soon as they laid low, and then they were surrounded and killed. Unbelievable! How did they do this? A senior commander asked with a frown. The shapeshifter leader shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. Even the members who escaped from the front lines didn't know what happened. They only know that the enemies, who were originally retreating in a panic, suddenly seemed to have received some kind of order and began to methodically rebuild their homes in certain places. At the same time, they sped up and desperately gave birth." "Did your people not notice anything unusual? For example, a messenger or some kind of magical communication?" The commander was clearly unwilling to give up and continued to ask. In his view, this abnormal behavior was clearly an order from the higher-up. "Really? I think we might need to re-evaluate the enemy. Obviously, the Eniots are using a power we don't understand, and this power is common among them." A council member lightly knocked on the table and concluded. "You mean retreat?" Another council member carefully glanced at the chairman from the corner of his eye. At this moment, anyone who wasn't an idiot could feel that this old man who held the highest authority in the entire civilization was like a volcano that was about to erupt. But the opposing council member didn't care about this and replied with a sneer, "Of course we have to retreat. Otherwise, do we continue to waste our precious resources and trained warriors and spellcasters? Don't forget, the reason we're sitting here isn't to protect the interests of an individual, but to protect the interests of the entire civilization." "Are you talking about me?" The chairman narrowed his eyes and his pupils flickered with a dangerous glint. "No, you're mistaken, Your Excellency. I'm only talking about those who put their own rights above the entire civilization." The council member didn't back down and retorted. Just as sparks began to appear in their eyes and they were about to go further, the light in the environment suddenly dimmed. The next second a black shadow appeared out of thin air and mocked with a deep and hoarse voice, "Aha! What did I just see? A struggle for power. The council that shouldered the rise and fall of the entire civilization has fallen to such a state." "It's you." The chairman's expression changed drastically and he subconsciously grabbed the powerful magical item he was keeping. Seeing his action, the black shadow sneered and curled his lips. "Are you that afraid of me? Afraid of me? Even relying on that thing to give you courage? A few thousand years ago, the chairman could easily suppress us with his own strength." "Shut up. This is the council. It's not your place to interrupt. State your intentions." The chairman interrupted without holding back. Chapter 1380. You want a pardon? The speaker, who was extremely sensitive to politics and power, immediately figured out what the other party wanted from him. As the leader of the highest authority of the entire civilization, he had many privileges that ordinary Dalent people could only dream of in their lifetime. Among them, pardons were the most basic and also the easiest to get. Even he himself could not remember how many pardons he had signed since he took office. But the problem was that there had never been a culprit who had killed and destroyed unscrupulously on the mother planet who had been pardoned. If he really handed over the pardons, he would immediately become the target of hostility and hatred of countless people. He could basically say goodbye to the political stage. That's right. I need a pardons to ensure that they won't do anything extreme at the last moment. The leader of the Shadow Guards gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. Obviously, it was impossible for him to not know the stakes involved in this pardon. He just wanted to embarrass the other party and let this high and mighty chairman taste pain and helplessness. Just like all people who had been suppressed and treated unfairly for a long time, a lot of anger and dissatisfaction had accumulated in the heart of every member of the Shadow Guards. The reason why they did not show it before was not because they did not have a temper, but because they had not found a way to vent. But now, with the Expeditionary Army's repeated failures, these guys could no longer hold back their restless hearts. They longed to return to the center of power and seize what they had lost. This kind of strong emotion and ambition could be clearly felt by every Dalent higher-up present. But for some reason, every one of them subconsciously ignored this point. Including the opposition members and the Expeditionary Army commander, without exception, they ignored the members of the Shadow Guards who had been constantly in contact with low-level warriors and spellcasters during this period of time, allowing these guys to expand their influence. Right now, the Shadow Guards, which should have been full of obscurity, was already known by most people. Some of the relatively younger guys even began to worship this group of powerful heroes who had turned the tide several times. Looking at the ambition flashing in the other party's eyes, the speaker took a deep breath and asked in an incomparably serious tone, "Are you sure that a pardon can bring the two boys back unharmed?" "Of course." The leader of the Shadow Guards nodded carefully. "Apart from that, I also need the Expeditionary Army's help to lure them out from the depths of the earth." "As you wish. But let me put it bluntly. If you don't fulfill your promise, then everything that I've promised you before will be in vain." As he spoke, the chairman took out a blank black slate and entered some information into it as quickly as he could before attaching his personal magical imprint. In this way, a legal pardon statement was completed. Now, no matter who it was, as long as they entered their name, no matter how unforgivable their crimes were, they would not have to worry about being hunted down and judged. "Thank you very much. I swear, it won't be long before you see those two naughty little guys again." The leader of the Shadow Guards bowed slightly, and there was a hint of playfulness in his tone. After he turned around and left, a counselor who had remained silent from the beginning to the end suddenly asked, "I don't understand. Why did you agree to his request?" According to the rules set by the Parliament when it was first established, the Shadow Guards should never appear in public again. In particular, the power they possess must be strictly limited to 2-digit. Otherwise, enough. I know what I'm doing. Without waiting for the counselor to finish speaking, the chairman rudely interrupted him. Times are changing. When the Parliament was first established, it was mainly because we had just experienced a tragic war, a war between divine authority and mortals. Therefore, restricting divine authority and the power that is deeply embedded in the depths of our souls naturally became the most important thing. But now, with the increasing prosperity of magical power, we have broken away from the shadows of the past. Moreover, we have invented countless spells and weapons that can kill God. There is no need to continue clinging to those rigid rules and not let go. Moreover, the reason why the Shadow Guards are united now is not because they are too few in number. Think about it, when their members expand to 3 digits, 4 digits, 5 digits, will everyone still obediently listen to one person's orders? No. Of course not. They will split. They will be like us now, with all kinds of ideas and factions. When that time comes, the Parliament can infiltrate the Shadow Guards and truly turn them into a sharp weapon to be used against our enemies. You mean to allow them to expand the number and influence of the Shadow Guards? The counselor's eyes widened as if he had heard some shocking words. Yes, times have changed. From the moment those 2 boys appeared, our civilization has welcomed a new opportunity and challenge. I know that some of you are against me, hoping that I will taste the bitter fruit of failure and hand over the power in my hands. But have you ever thought about whether the people who will lead me have the ability to make the right judgment in such a complicated situation? The chairman used a sharp gaze to sweep across those who had a disdainful or indifferent expression on their faces. But what was interesting was that for some reason these people kept silent without any discussion. They did not express any opinions nor did they make any fierce rebuttals. They seemed to have decided that no matter what the chairman did, he would definitely fail in the end. Instead of wasting energy to argue and quarrel now, it was better to wait patiently for the results and then clean up the mess. At the same time, the leader of the Shadow Guards who had received a pardon had now returned to the deep underground tens of thousands of kilometers away from the expeditionary army camp. With an incomparably cold voice, he said to a few expectant companions, "Rejoice, my brothers and sisters. Those idiots from the Parliament have finally handed this thing to me. Now, what you have to do is to follow the plan and spread the news to the ears of every member of the expeditionary army. I'd like to see how long he can hold on to power in the situation where he has lost the support of the people. When he disgracefully steps down and the Parliament descends into chaos and power struggles, that will be the day we return to the center of power. Thousands of years of anger, repression, silence, all of this will erupt like a volcano in the near future. Facts will prove that we are the ones who can shoulder the glory and responsibility and lead the entire race forward." Wonderful Book House.